Education and Families Committee. Thanks very much for your attendance this afternoon. Before we move to declarations of interest, can we get a note of apologies, Andrew?
Yes, Convener. I've only received notification of 2 apologies, one from Councillor Wilson and one from Graham Patterson.
Thanks very much for that, Andrew. Are there any other apologies? No.
Can I put apologies in, Chair, for Councillor Gallagher, please?
Okay, thanks, Sandy, for that, and Andrew will note that just now. Colleagues, takes us on to agenda item number 1, which is declarations of interest in terms of ethical standards in public life. Scotland Act. Does anyone have anything to declare?
Can I declare on this one, Chair, as a Chair of the Children's Services Partnership Board, and also being on the IJB, can I declare an interest there? I don't think that will preclude me from participating in the meeting. Thanks.
Sorry, Councillor Watson, which agenda item was that, please?
It was Alison Barton's one. If you come, I'll come back to you with that, Andrew, once I find it.
Okay, I think Councillor London has got the perhaps the same declaration. Jordan.
Thanks, Convener. Yes, in similar terms to Councillor Watson, both as a member of the CSPB, the Champions Board, and a member of the IGB. And in similar fashion to Councillor Watson, I am frantically trying to find the agenda number, but I think it relates to keeping the promise, which I think is agenda item 5.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much, Councillors London and Johnson. Any other declarations of interest? No. Okay. Colleagues, we've had a request in the last 15 minutes for the suspension of standing orders to discuss the multi-establishment leadership model. There was a similar discussion and request at the last Education Committee meeting. So it would be my intention to take that at this stage, and then we'll move on to the substantive items contained within the agenda. The request has come from Councillor Lennon, seconded by Councillor Larson, and I do see a point of order from Councillor Stubbs, so I'll come to Councillor Stubbs before I go any further. Alan?
Thanks, Frank. The not knowing the email that you've received in its entirety, is it necessary for a suspension of standing orders? Can we not accept an emergency motion without us having to vote as a committee on it? As convener, you have that authority, I understand.
No, it would be, we went through the process before. It would be my intention that if there was to be any discussion on this, that it would require the suspension of standing orders. There is no inclusion of this within the papers. It was a budget decision taken in 2020, ratified in 2021. There are financial implications to this, so it would be my intention to treat it in that way. But I would at this point say that it is Councillor Lennon, as I was saying, and Councillor Larson who have moved and seconded this. I'll ask Andrew to share the proposal on the screen, and then I'll hand over to Greg to discuss that. Thanks very much. Okay, colleagues, thank you for the chance to have a look at that. Greg?
Chair, thanks very much. I'll not go into the details of the motion at the moment, but under standing order 15, obviously I'm looking for the suspension of that. Then I take it I'll be allowed to discuss the aspects of the motion if the vote is won.
That's correct, absolutely. Thanks, Greg. So you're formally moving at this point?
Formally moving, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Larson, you seconding that?
I am, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much. As I said a few moments ago, colleagues, this was a budget decision that was taken 2020, 2021. There have been, there was a paper, I think, in March 2020 around this issue as well. The process is ongoing. There are discussions that are taking place. with key stakeholders, and it would be not my intention to support the removal of standing orders at this time.
Convener, Councillor Linden has put a point of order in the chat bar.
Thanks. Sorry, Convener, and sorry for interrupting. Can I just confirm, Convener, and perhaps that's what you're articulating, notwithstanding the request to suspend the standing orders, which is going to go to the vote in a moment, that in reflection on Standing Order 23, which is that a member may submit a notice of motion for consideration at any meeting of the committee for which the motion shall be printed or considered in terms of the chair determining its competency. Have you ruled there, therefore, Chair, that matter is not competent based on the fact it's a budget decision? Is that your position?
I do not deem this to be competent for discussion at this meeting today.
Many thanks, Chair.
Okay, Andrew.
Convener, if I may also on that point that Councillor Linden's made, Standing Order 23 relates specifically to the council where there is different process for motions. I don't know if anyone has a copy of Standing Orders in front of them.
Standing Order 23 relates specifically to committee. I have them in front of me.
Okay, if we can just stick to the issue at hand,
Thanks, Chair.
and if we can move to the vote.
Yes, Convener. So this is a vote entirely on whether to suspend Standing Order 15, and it's not in relation to the merit of the motions put forward. So I'll call members' names out in order, and if you can just indicate whether yes, you wish to suspend standing orders, or no, you don't, or if you wish to abstain. Councillor Anderson.
Chair, through yourself, Councillor Stubbs, as a point of order.
Alan, sorry, point of order.
Frank, apologies if it comes across as disruption. It's not in any way meant to be. I wonder if you can articulate on what basis you rule the motion not to be competent under standing orders. You've now outlined that it was a decision taken in 2020, so certainly the 6-month rule does not apply. It's certainly an educational decision, and it would be relevant to the Education Committee on that basis. So on what basis are you ruling the motion not competent before we have to go to the process of suspending standing orders?
Councillor Stubbs, this was a budget decision that was taken in 2020. There was a ratification of that in 2021. There is budget implications for this, for any reversal of this decision. There was an attempt to remove standing orders at the last Education Committee to discuss this very item. That was unsuccessful. The members are perfectly in their right to seek to suspend standing orders to discuss this matter. But in my opinion, and in my position as chair, I do not believe that this should be accepted as an emergency motion. There are discussions ongoing with key stakeholders, including the staff, the parents, the pupils, at both schools. There was a meeting with the elected representatives from that ward as early as last week. I believe there is a further meeting tonight on this matter. So it is not my view at this point that there should be a motion brought forward. There is a process that has been followed in relation to this matter, and it's only right that that be allowed to be completed. Andrew, I see there is a point of order from Councillor Lennon.
Chair, again, in the spirit and trying not to be disruptive, I would highlight there's been a fundamental shift in change in circumstance in this item. So put it back to a budget decision was made 2 years ago. I think that's where it kind of has to be heard, but thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lennon, I don't share your view on that, but I appreciate your comments. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson, I don't think is on the call. Councillor Junaid Ashraf? Nope. Councillor Barclay?
Suspend.
Suspend, yes. Councillor Brannan McVeigh?
Not to suspend.
Councillor Burgess?
No.
Councillor Burrows?
No.
Councillor Campbell?
No.
Councillor Castles?
No.
Councillor Fannin? Councillor Farouk? Councillor Feeney? Councillor Fisher,
No.
Councillor Fotheringham,
Suspend.
Councillor Goldie,
Suspend.
Councillor Graham,
No.
Councillor Hogg,
No.
Councillor Catherine Johnson,
Suspend.
Councillor Tom Johnson,
Suspend.
Councillor Jones,
No.
Councillor Kelly,
No.
Councillor Kerr, Councillor Larson,
Suspend.
Councillor Lennon,
Suspend.
Councillor Linden,
Suspend.
Councillor Loughran,
No.
Councillor McGowan,
Suspend.
Councillor Masterton,
Suspend.
Councillor McManus,
Suspend.
Councillor McNally,
No.
Councillor McPake,
No.
Councillor McVeigh,
No.
Councillor Mooney,
No.
Councillor Quigley,
No.
Councillor Shevlin,
No.
Councillor Stephen, Councillor Stubbs,
Suspend.
Councillor Watson,
No.
Councillor Woods,
No.
and as this is an education matter, Derek Hannon.
No.
Thank you. So 32 members participated in the vote. 22 members are required to reach the 2/3 threshold, but only 12 members voted to suspend standing orders. Therefore, the motion to suspend standing orders is not carried.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Moving on to the substantive items on your agenda, colleagues. With your indulgence, I will move agenda items number 14 and number 15 to the start of the agenda. James McKinstry has got an urgent meeting to attend, so I would ask for your indulgence on that to take agenda items number 14 and 15 first, and then we'll move to agenda item number 2. So agenda item number 14 is contract awarded below the committee approval threshold. Are there any questions on this item? Don't see anybody in the chat bar.
Sorry, I get cut out there. Have we moved to agenda item?
We're moving to agenda items number 14 and 15, taking them first, Tom, and then we'll move back to agenda item number 2.
Okay.
Do you have a question on agenda item number 14?
It's taken me a bit by surprise. I think I did.
Claire, come to you first. Councillor Barclay.
Thanks, Chair. I'm able to ask how many of the CO2 monitors is this going to cover? Is that part of the contract? Do they not know yet, or have you an idea of how many?
Okay, James may be in a position to answer this, or if not, Gerard may pick this up. James?
Yeah, this contract which you have in front of you was for 1,000 monitors, I believe, and we've also purchased an additional 2,200 monitors. So in total, we've got over 3,000 monitors across our school estate.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions to this agenda item. Are we happy to agree? Thank you. Next agenda item is agenda item number 15, which is Universal Free School Meals 2022-2023. This is an update paper. James, can you cover the salient points, please?
Thank you, Convener. Committee will recall that we provided an update paper to this committee last September, and at that committee we were asked to come back to committee early in the new year and to give a further update. So that's what the purpose of today's paper is. If I could refer you to paragraphs 1.1.1 to 1.1.5 of the report, and that deals with the primary 4 and primary 5 rollout. And you'll recall that free primary school meals were rolled out to primary 4 children from August of last year, and have recently been rolled out to primary 5 school children from January, start of January this year. So there's 4 sections in that report. In relation to project resources, which is in 1.1.1, we have implemented the P45 rollout, and generally things have went very, very smoothly. We have created some additional posts to help deliver that rollout. COVID has had an impact in numbers at times during the rollout. For example, with class groups self-isolating in particular schools at any point in time since August. Our average uptake is across all free school meal settings is sitting at about 70% at the moment. It's 73% in the report, but there was a bit of a drop in December and January as there was more self-isolation, for example, happening. We continue to take steps to promote the free school meal initiatives. We're currently working with the lowest 20 primary schools across the state, so that's the lowest, in terms of uptake. Just looking to witness what's happening with the dining experience and working with the schools to see what we can do to promote it further. We market theme days through the year, linking into, for example, Burns Day, Valentine's Day, etc. And importantly, what we've started doing recently is we've been issuing packed lunches out to some homes to let parents see what their kids could get within the school in a packed lunch, because quite often parents might not want their kids to take a meal, for example, and we'll send them into school with a packed lunch. So we're showing them what they can get in a packed lunch as well, which would save them about £15 a week or £60 a month. So just trying to kind of promote that. And we're also working through social media and also directly texting parents as well, just reminding them about this update. In relation to the equipment, we have updated quite a lot of catering equipment in our kitchens. We've also, for the primary 4 and primary 5, we've done some capital works at 3 schools to turn them into production kitchens, and we've been working with the individual schools, individual head teachers, to make sure that there's enough capacity in the school to deliver the primary 4, primary 5 rollout, and that has been successful. Moving on to primary 6 and primary 7, which is contained in paragraph 2.1 to 2.7 of your report. In October of last year, we submitted to the Scottish Futures Trust our estimate for capital costs of that, and also our estimates for revenue costs. If I deal with capital first of all, we submitted a capital bid of £4.2 million, and that was mainly to refurbish an additional 15 kitchens in order that they could become full production kitchens. Where we are in the capital at the moment is there is £30 million that's been set aside nationally, but as yet that has not been distributed out to local authorities, so we don't have any funding that's came to us on that, and we haven't yet been informed what our funding would be. In relation to revenue for primary 4 and primary 5, 42 million is set aside nationally, and I would expect that we will be informed very shortly what our revenue allocation will be, and that's for primary 4 and primary 5. In relation to primary 6, primary 7 rollout, there's been no announcements made in relation to revenue, and if I can draw you to your attention to page 380, which is the second bullet point in the recommendation, you'll see that there's an amendment from the initial target date of August 2022 for the rollout to P6 and P7 to later in the parliamentary term. The time frame has not yet been specified by the Scottish Government. So the purpose is to provide committee with an update on where we are. In relation to how we've been rolling this out, I think we've been doing quite well. In relation to rolling it out to future stages, I think we are ready to do that when announcements are made at some point in the future.
Thanks very much, James, for that report. There are a couple of questions from members. I'll come to Councillor Cathy Johnson first, and then Councillor Burgess. Cathy?
Thanks, Chair. How does the North Lanarkshire compare with the other authorities, on the 73% uptake?
Okay, James, I don't know if you'll have that information at hand.
At this time, we don't have that information. There is an annual report which is produced, I think it's produced around about September this year, which covers the previous year's figures. Generally, we're comparable with other authorities in terms of the uptake tends to be stay around about the same. But it would be my intention to bring a report to a future meeting of this committee in the new school year that would give an update and particularly focus on the primary 4 uptake and the primary 5 uptake, which has been the recent policy developments.
Okay, right, thanks. That would be great. Can I ask you a supplementary? I've always wondered this for many years. What happens to if the parents are supplying the lunch? What happens to the money that's not been spent on a free meal? You know,
James?
the surplus money.
Well, what we do is we tend to resource up the staff costs and the food costs, etc., with the level of demand that we expect. We monitor the demand as it comes in. So there is no surplus money in the system. If you like, we do not charge a profit on school meals coming in. It's full cost recovery.
That you just maintain the money that isn't spent on school meals and use it for other things. Is that it?
All the money that comes in for school meals, whether it's from parents or whether it's from the Scottish Government, is used for the provision of school meals.
Right. Thank you very much. That's all.
Okay, thanks, Cathy. Councillor Burgess, Bob?
Thanks, Convener. James, it's along similar lines, but I've got 2 questions. But if I could get just a wee bit more clarification on the money side of it. You've got in the ongoing additional recurring revenue costs of 2,907,000 as a loss of paid meals. How does that become a loss if you haven't sold them, you've given them away because you've got money off the government?
James?
That lost income that we get is, to be honest with you, it's just a budgeting issue, an accounting issue, if you like. At the moment, we've got £2.9 million worth of income which would come in from school meals. We would not get that, but you're right in what you say in terms of, that would be covered hopefully by the grant that would come in from the Scottish Government, because what we also need to do is we need to keep an eye on in terms as to what this will cost the council going forward, because at the moment we are maintaining the costs within the grant level that we've got. Within, as we've been rolling out to P4, P5, there has been some additional costs, but we've also been able to absorb some of the cost pressures in our existing budgets, for example, in terms of increasing productivity. But as that rolls into primary 6, primary 7, there could become less opportunity to do so. Okay, fine. And my second question is on your proposed capital works. You've got Thornley Primary and Wishaw. St Thomas's, was that looked at? That's just a short distance from Thornley. Was that looked at for any capital spend?
James, do you have that information?
Yeah, all schools were looked at in relation to whether whether any adjustments had to be done, any of the capital works had to be done for future stages of rollout. So in answer to your question, yeah, St Thomas's would have been looked at. Okay, lovely, thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Councillor Tom Johnson.
Hello, Convener. Just to point out, by the way, I think the word test is coming up under my name. That was because an engineer was looking at the laptop. So it's myself. The question I want to ask is, you mentioned a small number of extra jobs for free meals expansion. How many jobs actually?
I don't actually have the number exactly of that. I could get that for committee and send an email around committee. I think it's also fair to say as well that other initiatives as well, that the council's been taking forward, and also national policy objectives as well, has been creating jobs as well. For example, 1140 provision not only been creating teachers and nursery assistants, etc., but also catering staff as well. But I don't actually have those figures to hand. But what I'll do is I'll get those figures, and with your approval, Convener, I'll just email the whole committee.
Yep, I think that would be useful. Thanks very much for that, James. Thanks, Councillor Johnson, for that. And we'll know now if test appears in the chat bar who it is. So thanks, Tom, for clarifying that. And Paddy Hogg is next.
Thank you, Convener. Just one query, but first of all, could I just say to James and to the staff, a huge thank you for all the work put in here, not just for the uptake, but gearing up for the provision that's being done. It's totally essential. Is there any chance we can have some feedback on the nutritional quality of meals. I mean, the reason I ask this is it's so important for brain development that we make sure people have the right nutrition, you know, and especially coming from poorer backgrounds where people can't afford organic food, etc. I think it's important. A point that's worth making is that during this COVID period we've been going through and hopefully coming out of now, when people are stressed due to cortisol, etc., you find that particularly minerals tend to be used up fast. So I hope we can adapt as we have done and make sure we're looking towards the health, food and well-being of the pupils, which is a great objective of the council. But well done to everyone in the work, particularly to James's comments there.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Paddy. I'm sure James will accept the importance of nutritious meals for all our young people. So thanks very much for that. I don't see anyone else in the chat bar. Are we happy to accept the recommendations? Okay, thanks very much for that, colleagues. Takes us back to agenda item number 2, which is minutes of the Education Employees Appeal Subcommittee meetings that have taken place. There are 3 minutes presented today. Are we happy to note these? Thank you. Takes us on to agenda item number 3, which is a paper on the religious representative for the Roman Catholic Church. Colleagues, as you know, William Cunningham has stepped down from his post, and I'm sure the committee would like to thank William for his contributions over a number of years in relation to this committee, the support he has given members. So we thank William and send our best wishes to him for the future. And colleagues, we have the recommendations here. Andrew is on hand to answer any questions that members may have for the appointment of Jerry McCormick as the new religious rep from the Roman Catholic Church. I see Claire Barclay's in the chat bar just now. Claire?
Frank, you basically did what I was going to do, was to thank Bill Cunningham and get it on record for the work he's done in the position of the here on this committee, and to wish, if things go ahead and we agree this, to wish Jerry McCormick all the best. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks very much, Claire, for that. Colleagues, are we happy to agree with the recommendations? Okay, thank you very much for that. Takes us on to agenda item number 4, which is the annual report from the Chief Social Work Officer. This has already been to Adult Health and Social Care Committee last week. I'll ask Alison if you can touch on some of the main points contained within the report, and then we'll open up the questions. Alison?
Thanks, Convener. As you've indicated, this is the annual report for 2020-21 of the Chief Social Work Officer, and as outlined in the cover report, there is obviously, it's part of my responsibilities as Chief Social Work Officer to bring an annual report to members, and the intention of that is to provide an overview both of the context and the delivery of all of social work services over the period in question, and also to highlight particular issues around performance and service delivery. What you have in front of you is a report that follows a standard format that's set nationally by the Office of the Chief Social Work Advisor, and covers the broad context for the delivery of social work services in relation to governance. Some of what's in the report this year you will be familiar with, because there haven't been massive changes since the previous report was presented, but there is an update in particular in relation to delivering for communities and the change that has established in terms of the context of delivery, as well as some of the wider drivers, and of course, as you'll be well aware, the context of delivery during the pandemic period. The bulk of the report, and it's split into sections that cover carers and the different social work care groups, talks about service improvement activity and performance within the service over the year in question. And there is also a section that covers workforce issues and some of the challenges that that will provide a context for service delivery going forward. I don't propose to go into any huge detail around the content because it's a retrospective report. Quite a lot of the activity in it, which will be of interest to this committee in relation to children, families and justice social work services, has already been reported on through programme of work reports over the previous year. I would perhaps just highlight that one of the things worth noting in relation to demand for services is that whilst, because of the context of the pandemic, some particular areas of demand initially around child protection, etc., had fallen off at the beginning of that period, that overall the demand on children and families services has increased over the period, and that perhaps reflects some of the additional needs that our communities are facing because of the impacts of the pandemic. Similarly with justice services, and there's a report that will follow in relation to community payback orders in particular, you will see that there is also an issue about suppressed demand because of activity that couldn't happen during the pandemic period. But really the report's there for your information, and I'm happy to take any questions you have about any specific elements of it.
Thanks very much, Alison. An important document, colleagues, I'm sure you'd agree. Tom Castles, I think, is, Councillor Cathy Johnson is the first in the chat, and then it'll be Councillor Castles. Cathy?
Thanks, Frank. Hello, Alison. I wonder if you could just briefly tell me, how effective are you finding the direct representation of young people on the board? The Children's Series Partnership.
Apologies, I just took a minute to unmute there. Councillor Johnson, it's a good question. We've now had representation on the board from young people, primarily through the Youth Council and Youth Forum, but also through our Promise Partnership and our Promise Development Workers for about 2 years now. And I think members who experience this directly on the board would agree that that's been very enriching to the process. And I suppose I would highlight that the way that we have included young people is designed not to be tokenistic, but so that they can support and make contributions about the key issues that are being debated by the Children's Services Partnership Board, but also that they can be involved in planning and our priorities over the next period. And at this point, we're working to a Children's Services Plan for period 21 to 23. And young people have been very much involved in the establishment of that plan. The Youth Council, with support from Community Learning and Development colleagues and some other staff, had led on the work that was done around the incorporation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and members have seen other activity launching our campaign on that recently. But also our Promise Development Workers, who are young people with lived experience of care, were fundamental in developing the vision that the partnership has adopted, and the whole plan is built around the foundations of the Promise. So I wouldn't pretend that we're where we want to be across the board in terms of embedding participation and involvement. We can always do better. But I think it has been a substantial and positive development over the last period of time.
Good, thank you very much. I've got another couple of wee questions.
Okay, carry on, Cathy.
Okay. And the 1.4, the public protection section, I noticed that it says here a relatively high number of young people are missing. It's page 26, Alison. And also Police Scotland on page 45 reported an 88% rise in missing young people, which is quite worrying, really. We have a young woman missing in Cumbernauld unless she's been found, and it's quite a worrying statistic, really. Can you expand on it? I know you won't have a solution for it, but anything you have to say, thank you.
Okay. I'm happy to respond to that. So it is an area that has been of concern for us as a service and as a wider partnership over the period of the time. We are quite robust in our recording of young people who go missing, both young people who are experiencing care and young people who are living in other situations, family situations in the community. And that impacts on sometimes, I think, how we benchmark with other local authorities. But we do have an issue in relation to young people who are missing for periods and who can, in that context, be vulnerable, obviously, to harm and exploitation within the community. So we have, it's been a key focus of the Chief Officer's Public Protection Group over the last period of time, and we've taken various measures to try and improve our response and to make sure not only that we support individual young people's safety, but safer communities, really. So in one of the other reports I'm going to speak to today, we have developed an approach to contextual safeguarding, which we're rolling out, which is really trying to help us look at the situations in which young people experience harm, and to work together as a partnership to try and address that and not simply individual young people's behaviour. We also have a partnership with Police Scotland and Barnardo's, which means that when young people do go missing, we have a process where they have someone neutral who's not involved in other aspects of their life, who can come and speak to the young person and their family and explore maybe what are the circumstances for young people going missing, to try and make sure that we can support and reduce some of the individual I suppose challenges that might contribute to them being missing from their wherever they stay. What I can say to you that hopefully will offer some reassurance to committee this afternoon is that we've just revisited our figures, and whilst we have still, I think, a problem in terms of young people going missing within the community, the previously quite high figures of young people going missing or missing episodes from our children's houses for young people experiencing care have almost halved over the last period of time. So despite the challenges, we are making progress in that area, but it's something that we're continuing to focus on and attend to.
Right, thank you very much for that. Now, my last question. On page 61, there's a table regarding complaints in care homes. I think it's about the last page in the whole document. And I wondered why the complaints in care homes in Cumbernauld and Coatbridge hadn't fallen, whereas in all the other areas, I wondered if there were any initiatives taking place in the other care homes that hadn't reached Cumbernauld and Coatbridge yet, or whether people just complain more in these two areas. I don't know. I just wondered if you had any insight there.
Councillor Johnson, to be honest, I can't give you an answer. I would be hypothesising in terms of a response to that. But I can, I'm happy to speak to local managers and see if they've got a little bit more intelligence, and if so, happy to share further information around that. There can just be natural fluctuations in complaint activity. We do have, obviously, because of some of the challenges that there have been through the pandemic period, I suppose more than ever, a focus on care homes and the quality of support in care homes just now. And that may have contributed to some extent to increased awareness and increased complaints. But in terms of the differentiation between areas, I would have to drill down on that a bit further and come back to you if there's any specific information.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Cathy. Councillor Castles.
Yeah. I've got a comment first. I've got the opportunity to make that. First of all, the report reminds me of the areas of experience within social work. I have the privilege of being one of the 3 councillors who was asked to represent the council on the adoption and fostering panel, and also as deputy provost to represent the council with the children's panel, although to a lesser extent.
but I was involved in the workings of the Adoption Enforcement Panel. It's one of the greatest feelings I have of being a councillor. Makes you proud to be a councillor and proud to be a North Lanarkshire councillor. When you see the work that the Adoption Enforcement Panel do with children and young adults, it's absolutely impressive. And sometimes you go away with a spring in your step, just particularly before one Christmas. It was all good news, seeing young people's lives turn around and actually meeting some of the social workers who'd worked with them as children and then come back in contact and saw them through the whole process and saw them as young, mature adults who were getting on with life. It really was a privilege. Absolutely fantastic, the whole process. Can I also ask two questions? The first one is on page 48. It's just that phrase on the alarms. It says telecare. Is that community alarms? Is it just a technical name for it? Is that a different type of alarm? The second one is on page 49, and that's self-directed support. Does that involve money going to the individuals as well? And if so, what protections are there to make sure that they're anticipating what they can actually do through this self-directed support? And the third question is on page 65, and it's about the recruitment of recruitment, in particular the retention of social workers. I see that there's a fact of the temporary contracts might be an issue there. I know that's been, since I started as a councillor, I think recruitment and retention of social workers was one of the issues. Is there a way forward with that area? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. Thanks for your comments at the start there, and for the work that you've done in this area in particular. I'll bring Alison in on the three questions that you've posed there. Alison?
Okay. Community alarms and telecare, Councillor Castles, just to say that you're right that community alarms is one of the areas that's covered by the sort of umbrella term about telecare. Telecare, I suppose, is a bit broader than community alarms. So although it's probably people's most common experience and probably the most common piece of equipment that we would provide to people who are vulnerable and may need to call on that sort of support in an emergency situation. There are other aspects of telecare, so there are other types of alarms that can be linked to the basic alarm for particular monitoring. There's also, in some instances, fire alarms, etc., links other activity alarms. But telecare covers a much broader range of support, some of which I suppose mirrors some of things that are commercially available through your sort of smart hubs in people's houses, you know, use of things like Alexa and these sort of things. Some of which is about sort of telehealth care and allows remote monitoring of people's health and well-being. So yeah, telecare is just the generic term for all of these things, whereas community alarms is obviously a specific element of the service. If you're comfortable, I'll move on to your second question about SDS. So self-directed support, I suppose, it reflects particular legislation, but also, I suppose, an approach to supporting individuals and families within the community. Some of that doesn't involve individual budgets. Some of it is around just working with people in a way that allows them to have more choice and to direct their own care and support plan more than they may have been able to do in the past. So we apply these sorts of principles quite broadly to when working with people in a range of situations. But some people do have a specific budget attached to their support. And if they do, either they may receive that budget directly, or it's something that the council can work with through a provider and commission a provider. And the self-directed element is obviously their involvement in that process and their ability to shape their own support plan. If people do get money, and if they're managing it directly, there are a set of procedures and safeguards around about that, which means that the spend is to some extent monitored within reasonable parameters, so that we've got assurance that it is being spent for the outcome to achieve the outcomes that we would wish. but clearly that's broadly speaking. We've got about just over 1,000 people, I think, who receive individual budgets, but not all receive direct payments. Some of that we manage the money for them. And the last question on social worker recruitment, if you're happy for me to move on to that. There is a challenge. It's a competitive market at the moment for social workers, and therefore we have always tried to make sure we're well placed in our offer so that we can attract social workers strongly. We unfortunately had to, I suppose, suspend our internal social work recruitment programme, our secondary scheme, because of budget restrictions 2 years ago, and we recruit mainly therefore now externally. It's something that we will be revisiting to look at what's the best way forward for us. The challenge at the moment, as it is the case with a number of services, is that some of the additional monies that we have in the system, including, for example, for justice services to help us deal with the backlog of demand because of the shutdown of the court system during COVID, is temporary monies, and it's quite hard to recruit to temporary posts compared to when you're offering permanent posts. So the way we are managing it at the moment is to look at our natural turnover, and where possible we recruit on a permanent basis with staff in temp locations to allow us effectively to offer staff the security that they want and get as many workers into our establishment as we obviously have the capacity and budget for, and that helps manage that a bit. But it is a challenge for us in terms of the current environment, and it's something we continue to review to look at where, to ensure that we've got the best possible offer to social workers. And that's not just about money, that's about development experiences and day-to-day operational support as well from managers.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Alison. Tom, are you happy with that? Okay.
Yes.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Hogg?
Thanks, Convener. Again, just to thank Alison for her very detailed report. And when it comes to things like the questions embedded in this comment, but it's to try and get a grip of the effect on young people and children during the last couple of years who have went through considerable trauma and stress, with stuff in the media about how they could kill their granny during lockdowns, and the fact that lockdowns were basically tying people with their abusers in the homes. And also want to echo what Councillor Johnston said about the shocking increase in up to 88% of younger people going missing. What was the percentage of those who returned to the home or were found okay, etc.? But the key question is, did Alison and her department have to increase the number of specialist support for trauma to help some of the children through this, particularly with things like you could kill your granny, the fragmentation of social interaction with families, etc.? Just wondering how the staff are coping with the problems they've got to deal with in the front line.
Alison?
Thanks, Councillor Hogg. It's a big question and a huge challenge that we're still working our way through, I suppose. But I think the key for us locally has been maximising the gains that we can get from strong partnership working. So that has been our approach within the service across education and families, but also our approach with the wider partnership, because we need to make sure we haven't necessarily, in terms of children's social work in particular, seen the same additionality of resource, but has maybe been allocated to other service areas during the pandemic. So we need to focus our attentions on where we can make the most difference, but also work as strongly as we can in partnership. So in relation to identifying families who've struggled the most during the pandemic, we've been working really closely, obviously, with our education, health, community learning and development and third sector colleagues. We have been, when you touched on young people who have, I suppose, experienced emotional distress through that period and who have been struggling. we very much look and coordinate with the work that Gerard leads within the service in terms of mental health and wellbeing, and the work that we've done with partners through the Children's Services Partnership. And again, that's part of the next report, I think, on the agenda today in terms of the community mental health and wellbeing framework. In deciding how we invest that money, we're very much looking at co-production with children, families and our school clusters, but also making sure that that complements the investment that's made, for example, in terms of school counselling, etc., as well as linking with our CAMS and community learning and development colleagues. So there certainly is a sense that we have a number of young people and families who are struggling more. And we know that younger children and children, and it links to the work that Gerard and the team had done in terms of the SDQ questionnaire that you heard about as well, that children in I suppose SIMD 1 and 2 are also struggling more than others and certain age groups. So we were continuing to work together really to look at how we target our resources and make sure that we fill gaps and try and identify needs at as early a stage as possible. But I think it's an ongoing, clearly an ongoing focus of work for the partnership and the service. So I wouldn't pretend yet that we've got the whole story or resolved that. And certainly in terms of the issue you raised about impact on staff, again, we continue to look and speak to staff themselves about what support systems we need to have in place, particularly when they've been remote working, so that they get the support they need to deliver the best service they can to our families and communities.
Thanks very much, Alison. Councillor Larson is next. Kirsten.
Thanks, convener. Alison, under 2.5, quality assurance of care homes. This was obviously, as you mentioned, a national story of huge interest throughout the pandemic for obvious reasons. During that period, I learned that we didn't own any care homes in North Lanarkshire, but I'm interested in the quality assurance and the regulatory oversight that we have of care homes. And I believe that there was some confusion in local authorities across the country about that oversight and that role at the start of the pandemic. I wonder if that's your experience. And it talks about some care homes within the authority experiencing disproportionate amounts of deaths compared to others. And it also says effective and enhanced communication with care homes and partners has been the key challenge of quality assurance. Can you tell me a wee bit about what you mean about that? What kind of oversight we do have, and if we're going to continue that partnership working beyond the pandemic? I'm obviously thinking that as we start to relax the approach to the pandemic and the restrictions start to ease, some people are again going to be disproportionately affected by the actions that we take. I'm just wondering if you could tell me a wee bit about the quality assurance and regulatory oversight that we have and how that's working.
Okay,
thanks.
thanks.
Sorry, Alison, just, I mean, the one thing I would just say, I mean, we have a fair amount of uncertainty coming down the road with the potential creation of a national care service and the implications that will have for governance arrangements for North Lanarkshire. But I'll bring in Alison to answer the specifics to the question. Okay,
thanks, Councillor Larson. So we have one intermediate home, but not and which is Muir Park in North Lanarkshire, which we have direct responsibility for. Other than that, obviously, we commission places in care homes, so support in terms of purchasing for individual places. We, because of the balance of care in adult services, mirroring, I suppose, the picture for children's services too, most people are supported in the community. So relatively speaking, compared to our levels of need and our deprivation profile, we use care home support less than most other local authority areas in Scotland, but clearly for a number of, a significant number of people, they need care within that residential or nursing home environment, and obviously we do commission that. In relation to the system that's in place for that, we have a quality assurance team that's centrally based that supports that. The oversight responsibility is shared. Clearly, care homes are registered via the Care Inspectorate and no longer by local authorities. So the Care Inspectorate have a scrutiny role and an oversight role, but we as commissioners, along with other local authorities, obviously also have responsibilities for the quality of services that's provided within care homes. So our quality assurance team support that because of the levels of, I suppose, increased demand and pressure on care homes who were having to provide service within a really challenging environment during COVID. We were provided with additional resources nationally from government to enhance care home monitoring, so that is still in place through additional staffing in our quality assurance team. In relation to what that looks like, there is obviously regular contact. There have been contact with providers as a group throughout the period of the pandemic. We also have an oversight group which involves both social work and health staff from the Health and Social Care Partnerships, because there were also during the period of the pandemic, and because of the particular health challenges, additional responsibilities which were given in legislation and guidance to nurse directors and health protection teams locally in relation to the oversight of care homes. So to this day, we continue to meet as an oversight team that would involve health and social work and with Care Inspectorate partners on a fortnightly basis locally to review principally the management of I suppose outbreaks and challenges associated with outbreaks in the care homes, but also to look at any other issues that are arising. And within that context, we also look at things like inspection outcomes and any adult protection referrals that we receive in relation to care homes. And that structure continues to this day. And I think although there may be some I suppose evolution of that going forward, it will continue to be a sort of partnership approach to the quality assurance within care homes. But we certainly have a team from a council perspective that leads on that and ensures that we pick up on any issues.
Okay, Kirsten, you happy with that?
Yes, Chair, could I ask a quick supplementary?
Okay.
Thank you. Alison, I hope my question doesn't come across as critical because it's not. I understand that we've had a national problem. Within the report, it discusses the home care staffing issues that we've had throughout. Again, I think that's been married out across the country, and I know that we've all rose to a monumental challenge. But there has been occasions where, as an authority, we've had to ask family members to intervene in terms of care. I'm just wondering what the staffing picture is like just now within social care home support.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Larson. So I'll cover this relatively briefly, but just to say that obviously you'll know that there's a mix of provision. The majority of our provision is in-house, but we also have substantial commission provision in care at home as well. There have been challenges of recruitment across the sector and an increase in demand across the sector over this period of time. And obviously, we have also been coping with increased absence rates, partly because of isolation and COVID. So there are times and reflecting also sometimes pressures on hospitals and increased demand to support discharges from hospitals, where the service has struggled to meet all the assessed need that has been made. And at times we have therefore gone back and had discussions with families about capacity to support relatives in the short term. However, our staffing has improved. We have been successful in recruiting, I think, over 80 new staff into our own home support teams. We're also continuing to look at how we can be as efficient as possible in the way that we deploy staff without compromising quality of care. So there remains challenges, and I wouldn't pretend otherwise, but the situation has improved a bit from the point a couple of months ago where we were really struggling to meet any new demand. But we know that people are having longer waits sometimes for care than we would want them to have. And we obviously do have to prioritise in some situations people who have got the most significant needs and who have the least family support as well. And we know that's not great, because we also want to ensure that carers get the support they need longer term. But continuing to work on those challenges, and there's a whole programme of work that's regularly reported to Adult Health and Social Care Committee and the IJB around the home support service.
Thanks, Alison. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I see no further questions in the chat just now. Are we happy to agree the recommendations? Okay, thanks very much for that, colleagues. Takes us on to agenda item number 5, which is keeping the promise. 2 years since the publication of the promise earlier this month. Certainly a lot of really innovative practice taking place here in North Lanarkshire, some excellent work, and I'll ask Alison if she can just touch on some of that within the report.
Thanks, Convener, and I'll be relatively brief because we've already touched on some of the content of this report and my responses to members' questions on the Chief Social Work Officer report. But specifically, this report updates on the programme of work associated with the family support element of the promise, because as members are aware from previous reports, the promise isn't solely about delivering improved care for those young people who experience care with us, but also trying to ensure that we minimise the need for that care, but also improve the experience of young people and their families more generally who are vulnerable through early and effective family support. And that's fundamental to the promise. And as I said earlier, is really fundamental to our children's services plan here in North Lanarkshire, which is built around that. So the report covers a number of particular strands of activity that we have been taking forward as a service and as a wider partnership as part of that comprehensive approach to shift intervention with families upstream, and to make sure, reflecting on Councillor Hogg's comments earlier as well, that that is trauma informed too. In our responses. So firstly, the report talks about the initiatives we've made in terms of contextual safeguarding. I've touched on that earlier, but we really have been at the forefront in Scotland of, I suppose, developing this approach, which particularly when we're talking about older age groups of young people, helps us as services assess some of the risks and work more effectively together to address some of the risks that children and young people don't only face in families but in their communities. So for some of the challenges young people face happen in peer groups and not in individual households, and sadly also through both criminal and sexual exploitation. And so traditional methods of working with young people and families don't always work so well in that situation. So we have been working to roll out contextual safeguarding training. We've been working with our promise development workers to understand more young people's needs, and we've established a young person's safeguarding panel, which and work jointly with police colleagues in particular, but also with other partners to try and ensure that we work with young people more systemically to address some of the safety concerns that can arise in communities. So there's an update on that in the report, and I'm happy to take questions on that. There's also an update on another issue that I highlighted earlier, which was how we're using our community mental health and wellbeing monies that were part of the national investment in terms of young people's mental health and wellbeing. And that really shows that we have been quite broad and creative in what we've done. Psychological services and community learning and development colleagues have been fundamental to the rollout of Liam, which is a support that helps young people who are experiencing anxiety and distress. We've been working with school clusters to co-produce supports that will address needs before the young people are experiencing real significant mental health problems. and we have also been providing some work, some support out of hours to young people through our intensive services team. And finally, I suppose just to note that we've also invested in support for young people who have neurodevelopmental challenges, because we know that families and young people in that situation can experience additional stresses and strains. So that's something we're looking to enhance. We do have the continuation of funding for that support into next year, and we're working to plan together, as I said, to complement the work that Gerard is leading through the other areas of service improvement around that whole agenda. Finally, the report in terms of areas of development talks about some of the work we're doing in youth justice. We're doing a review of our youth justice services, and members may be familiar with the concerns that have been reported nationally around young people, 16, 17-year-olds who end up in the adult justice system and specifically in custody. We are working to build on the work we've done through structured deferred sentencing in partnership with the local reporter to the Children's Hearing System and with local sheriffs to try and make sure that we're effectively implementing new sentencing guidelines that diminish, reduce the need for custody, and in fact, hopefully in line with the promise, eliminate the need for custody or for secure care for 16 and 17-year-olds going forward. But you'll see reference in the report to a particular initiative that we're taking forward to allow us to provide more intensive community options to support that ambition. And the last thing this report focuses on, and it's a really exciting opportunity for us, I think, here in North Lanarkshire, is the fact that we are one of 3 partnership areas where the Promise nationally is partnering on in relation to what's called HECM, which is Human and Economic Cost Modelling work. And that's some fundamental work that involves the Promise supporting us engage with partners, with our finance teams, etc., to look at where we are investing money just now in terms of family services, and how we can, what really needs to change so that we can move support upstream. So we're at the very early stages of that work, but we're the largest local authority and partnership that are involved in that work. We get the support of the Promise team nationally to help us begin to try and make that transformation and shift. Supports it aligns really well with the plan for North Lanarkshire and some of the work that we've already done as a service around direct payments and early support. But I think an exciting opportunity, and one that members can expect to see further reports on as we move forward. So that's probably all for me just now, but happy to take questions.
Thanks very much, Alison. We have questions from councillors London and Hogg. So Jordan, over to you first.
Thanks very much, Convener. Thanks very much, Alison, for the report. Always welcome the reports on the Promise and indeed keeping the promise here at Education and Families Committee. I want to focus my attention specifically on section 2 relating to HECM, and particularly sections 2.12 and 2.13. I think it's good that we're recognising on a local level that the underpinning understanding of the need to finance the commitment to keep the promise, and I think that the 2 key lines that jumped off the page to me were around funding required to keep the promise and understanding the strategic investment required. So it's great to see that there. The 2 key questions for me is in terms of section 2.14 of the report, where the parameters are mentioned, what are the timescales for that work coming forward in terms of the engagement with the CMT? And secondly, more broadly, how is the plan for North Lanarkshire dovetailing or being revised to fulfil the promise and deliver the clear opportunities that exist between the plan for North Lanarkshire and keeping the promise in terms of the synergy that there is already there?
Okay, Alison.
Okay, so that's quite a big strategic question, Councillor Linden, but you're right to ask it. I think in terms of where we're at with this work, it's the relatively early stages. We have been engaging with the consultant who's an audit background, who is leading on this work for the Promise nationally. We have, as you'll be aware, had a presentation to the Children's Services Partnership Board, because for this work to work, we need partnership engagement and not simply local authority engagement with it. The early stages have involved meetings with senior managers and including Derek and myself, and link with our finance team. So they are drilling down at the moment. They're looking at you know, what building on the work we did through realigning children's services to look at how and where we spend money at the moment, and what, so that we can begin to work through what needs to happen to shift that balance of that spend. We are anticipating that Fraser, who is the lead from the Promise team nationally, will be engaging with CMT before Easter on that, because it is something that, as you say, needs the support of the council and partners corporately, and not just this service, if we're going to make that work. So that's the starting point. We are also, I suppose, linking into with the wider movement around wellbeing budgeting, and keeping that in mind as well, and the learning from some of the projects that are happening elsewhere. And there's 2 smaller local authority areas that will also be part of this work. And again, we would hope to have joint learning from them as that's taken forward. In relation to the alignment with the plan for North Lanarkshire and delivering for communities more generally, I think we do already have that alignment. It's the issue will come in terms of our future service planning and where we spend money, as you say, to make that work. So I don't know that I have an immediate answer to your question about what that will look like, but I very much recognise that there is, when we talk about, as a corporate management team, about the plan for North Lanarkshire, a recognition that actually, similar to what we were talking about with the launch of the UNCRC, getting it right for children and our families really helps us deliver the overall plan for North Lanarkshire. And it's, you know, one's not possible really without the other. So I think that is already well recognised by the corporate management team, and the learning from this work as it progresses will inform our overall planning as a local authority in partnership.
Thanks. Convener, if you don't mind, just a brief supplementary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Obviously, thanks, Alison, for your answer. Obviously, we've spoken quite a lot, and the report makes reference a lot to the corporate management team, to the issue of corporacy in terms of the council and its partners in delivering on the promise. I'm not going to say it's a gap, it's probably not the right phrase, but I am keen to hear more about, particularly given the reference in the report at section 2.132, understanding the needs for strategic investment. I'm particularly keen to hear what work is being done or planned to be done in relation to work with elected members to understand not only the strategic financial implications of keeping the promise in terms of now and into the future in a budgetary context, but also specifically around the strategic requirements placed upon us in everything we do, either through committee or elsewhere, to fulfil the promise as well, and just to bring that perhaps more to life in terms of the obligations and requirements for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair question, Jordan. I mean, obviously there is a fairly challenging financial outlook being portrayed at the minute for local government in upcoming years. So it is important that that is kept at the forefront of people's minds. I'll bring Derek in perhaps on that from a strategic point of view as director, and then Alison can maybe supplement that if required. Derek?
I think I understand the thrust of Councillor Linden's questions, and I think that there's a couple of things I would just want to say, and I'm conscious Alison's been answering questions for quite a while, so I think it's only right I take the pressure off a wee bit. So my view is that the Promise Scotland came to us because of the plan for North Lanarkshire, and because of things that members had committed to, and because of the cross-party support and the clear strategic support for the young people who would come under that care experienced umbrella, and indeed because of Alison's work. So I think it's a measure of the way in which we are seen across Scotland as an exemplar authority, that they were interested in working with us, and also because we've been ambitious and because we are keen to look at new ways of operating generally, and that we're prepared to look at tough financial solutions to things even when they're challenging. We have been prepared to do some of those things. Hence, we've had a budget set recently where there's been the possibility of investment. So for me, the cost modelling work is a bit of a national team on behalf of Scottish Government trying to understand a challenge and think about how it could shape up policy, and us committing as an authority to working with them to come up with propositions. And I think that through the natural process of that, Councillor Linden, there will be opportunities for us to be able to engage with members, and probably for us to highlight to Scottish Government the importance of engaging with local elected members in that wider discussion as corporate parents. So I think that we don't have some of the answers in detail that you're looking for, but broadly we understand the thrust of the question. We would probably agree with that, and we would moreover say that in terms of the plan for North Lanarkshire and indeed our work as a committee and as a council, that one of the reasons why we're involved in the HECM work is simply because of the track record we're developing. I would also just lastly point out that there is interesting work in different parts of the UK around about funding for care leavers, for example, that probably Scottish Government will be keeping a keen eye on, and that maybe there are some lessons to be learned for us in terms of future UBI models for care leavers, for example. But mainly I think we were looking at it as being, how do we make sure the resource goes where it needs in the way that's most applicable to the young people and creates opportunities and builds on some of the SDS budgets, etc. So I think there'll be loads of opportunities for us to discuss this through this committee, through the Children's Services Partnership Group, and through other forums in which you and I both know, Councillor Linden, we have the chances to directly engage with the young people. So hopefully we'll be able to bring all that work through.
Okay, you happy with that, Jordan? That's great, thanks very much. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Convener. Just a few questions. First one is, do you have a crystal ball, Convener, when it comes to keeping the provost, or was it keeping the promise? Let's hope the election forthcoming is going to be good for everyone that's contributed greatly to their communities anyway. But second one was just to thank Alison for the considerable detail and the hard work from all our staff. I particularly liked a comment to do with the neurological issues and our staff looking to understand that. In terms of mental health and well-being, just a query to see if colleagues and professional staff are aware of a very brilliant neurosurgeon called Dr. Russell Blaylock. He's written a piece called, sorry, not written, it's a fantastic lecture on nutrition and social behaviour. And in that, he emphasises the importance of B vitamins for brain development, etc., and the deficiencies that can lead to behavioural problems and therefore law breaking, etc. And he's shown in thousands of cases and various studies that where there's intervention on nutrition, the social behaviour changes and the law breaking diminishes considerably. So that's just a question on that relating to mental health and well-being. Another one for Derek, and can I thank Derek very genuinely for his great professionalism over the years and his nuanced qualifications at times when his staff and himself have struggled to meet outcomes. He's been completely honest, and when the backs were to the wall, they came out really fighting on behalf of the residents to sort situations around, especially with the early year stuff, etc. So absolutely proud to be working with such a fantastic team. But the question here is, it might sound out of context, but it's a question about highlighting the Green Falls Athletics facility. In this context, if we could partner with sports development staff and just create an idea of sports competitions, athletics competitions that covers the whole of North Lanarkshire, and use that as a platform to push excellence, to push health, to push fitness and nutrition and help with the well-being, because there's nothing that helps more often than people's well-being than the achievement through sport. I don't know if you get that context at all, but we've got a fantastic world-class athletics facility at Green Falls. It would be good to see it utilised more and a platform for health and well-being through sport. I don't know if that's an idea worth pursuing.
Okay, thanks, Paddy. I mean, I'm sure an issue like that could be taken up with the officers away from the meeting in terms of the provision that's in place there. And in terms of your first point, I'm sure the officers will reflect on that as well moving forward. So thanks for those comments. Are there any other comments or questions? I don't see any in the chat. Are we happy to agree the recommendations? Thank you. Okay, takes us on, colleagues, to the next item on the agenda, which is tackling domestic abuse. This is an update on the improvement activity that's been taking place. Alison, if you can take us through the main points in the report, please.
Okay. I'll try and be relatively brief on this one because it is an update report, but members have previously had a number of reports relating to this programme of work. So the report covers two main areas today in terms of the update on the programme. One is an update on particular areas of improvement activity, and one is an update on our commission service, members having remembered, no doubt, about the change in provider for our commission service made and approved at committee last year. So in relation to the improvement activity we're taking forward to, I suppose, better address what's a very real and substantial need in our community related to the impact of domestic abuse. There's a number of areas covered by the report. One is the work that we've been doing as a Violence Against Women strategic partnership. We've talked before, and my previous reports have referenced that given the scale of this challenge in North Lanarkshire, we really need to look at work which addresses not only ensuring that we have the right support in place for victims of domestic abuse for both recovery and safeguarding, but that we try to intervene in a way that prevents and reduces the circumstances in which domestic abuse occurs. So it's within that context that the report's outlined today. You'll see that as a partnership, we are very much adopting that strategy in terms of the refresh of the overall partnership strategy and work plan. We've been engaging with the Improvement Service and stakeholders to develop our priorities, and that's something that we would hope will help focus our joint planning, and that we will be bringing forward a refreshed strategy in the early summer, which we can then share with members. In terms of specific areas of work, there's an update within the report on the work that we do in relation to high-risk situations around domestic abuse through multi-agency risk assessment conferencing, and we have agreed in principle to enhance support for that area through some of the Pan-Lanarkshire work we do in conjunction with Safe Lives and Women's Aid colleagues. You'll see too that through our justice services, we have engaged with Up to You, who are an external organisation that have been built from Portsmouth Council's really creative and developmental activity in this area, to not only roll out an intervention programme for those who are subject to justice orders because of domestic abuse and offences, but to roll out the wider family practice intervention programme, which will support workers with the skills to engage more effectively in family situations where domestic abuse is impacting, but where the perpetrator is not on a justice order. So that's something, again, that will enhance our ability to address this and is being rolled out across children's services in partnership with our justice services over the next period. an area that this committee will be particularly interested in is the refresh and embedding of mentors and violence prevention work within schools, which is really around early intervention, changing the attitudes that support and sustain domestic abuse in our communities. That work will have been rolled out, or has now been rolled out to all secondary schools within North Lanarkshire, and we're working to develop programmes for late primary, and that will also be aligned with work that's been led nationally and locally by Rape Crisis around the Equally Safe in Schools programme. And finally, the report updates on Safe and Together, which is again a nationally accredited programme for working with families and partnering with the non-abusing parent where domestic abuse is a feature. So I'm happy to take any questions on that. The other, I suppose, developments that are reflected in the report is that there has been new funding come into the area through the National Equally Safe Fund. I know members in the past have expressed concern about the sustainability given the change in contract position of local women's aid services. All 3 local women's aid organisations have received core funding through the Equally Safe Fund, which will allow them to continue to provide services across their respective areas. Finally, the report talks about the commission service, AURA, which has been established and running in North Lanarkshire since July. There's information in 2.1 about the activity levels and referral levels to AURA, and also some information about the partnerships and work that AURA is beginning to develop to, I suppose, enhance the offer of support in the community to those who experience domestic abuse, and in particular to engage holistically for those that approach the service for support to ensure that we can meet the range of needs that people experience. We have also outlined our continued working arrangement with local women's aid organisations at 2.15 and 2.16, and at 2.17. The next steps that we intend to take forward in terms of development of this improvement programme. So I won't say any more than that just now, but happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Alison. A few questions for you in the chat. We'll head over to Cathy Johnson.
Thank you. Sorry, Alison, I feel I'm bombarding you today. Just 2 small questions. At 1.2, it says the prevalence of domestic abuse in our area remains stubbornly high despite strong partnership working. How high is high? How do we compare with others round about us?
Cathy, can you ask your second question as well? Just and Alison, I'll answer both of them.
At the same time. Yes, I was waiting to find it. Yes. At 216, I was disappointed to see that Women's Aid are still not agreeing to meet AURA. I thought that might have improved by now. There may be some improvement, but not sufficient. Can you help me out there? That's all.
Cathy, a couple of questions there. Alison.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. So in relation to the prevalence of domestic abuse, I think it's difficult to be absolutely clear about reliable figures. The figures, the most recent figures by police reports of domestic abuse would suggest that the prevalence is relatively stable in our area, not decreasing, but not increasing substantially. And the previous figures I think I provided in a report were around about 4,000 incidents per annum. But what we know is that reported domestic abuse is the tip of the iceberg. So what we also know from referrals to a range of other services, including to all of those who are partners in the Violence Against Women strategic group, is that the soft information is of an increase and more demand for support for people who've experienced domestic abuse over the pandemic period in particular. And I think some further challenges because of the slowdown of the court process, which means that sometimes victims are waiting longer than they would have done before for cases to go through court, and any sanction to be applied in relation to that. So it's difficult to give an exact prevalence because there's lots of different measures, but what we do know is that figures remain high, and that although our formal increase hasn't been as big as some other local authority areas nationally, relatively speaking, we are one of the areas that has quite a high prevalence overall. In relation to the relationship between our new Commission Service and Women's Aid, you're right in picking up, and it's in the report because it was a question previously that members had an interest in about relationships. We have offered to try and address some of the tensions and just ensure that people understand the offer that both services make to facilitate a meeting. That's been declined, but at the same time, both those services are part of the wider partnership and both engage as part of the wider partnership. So although the Women's Aid haven't seen it necessary for a particular facilitated meeting with ORA, they are services that are round the table as part of the operational group and the operational arrangements in North Lanarkshire, and people work together. And what we have as a result of the funding decisions that were made recently nationally as well is additional resource coming into North Lanarkshire to support us address this whole area, and I think that can only be a good thing.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Cathy. Councillor Larson. Kirsten?
Thanks, Chair. The first thing I wanted to say was that I think it's marvellous that some of these programmes have been rolled out in schools. I think it's hugely important that young people find the language and the tools to be able to express their emotional well-being, and I know that that's something that all schools have been working on throughout the pandemic as well, helping children express their emotions in a kind of managed way. In relation to Women's Aid, I'm glad they got funding from elsewhere. I'm not surprised they've not entered into meetings because they are, they have a completely different approach and philosophy. I want to ask two questions. First of all, Alison, at the risk impact 4.6, it says that in the short term there are a number of risks. However, it then only outlines one of these risks, and so I'm wondering if there are more that the report's not giving us insight into. And I know that Cathy asked there about numbers and comparisons with other local authorities. I understand that there is a darker figure of crime, but given that we are the only local authority using this particular approach, I'm wondering if we've sought out any comparative analysis to ensure that our approach is a successful one in comparison to others. I feel a wee bit shocked that the numbers have flattened out throughout the pandemic. It's only anecdotal, but I've heard, that domestic violence or instances of reported domestic violence have increased throughout the piece. Thanks.
Thanks, Kirsten. Alison?
Okay, thanks, Councillor Larson. In relation to the only one using this approach, maybe that's not quite the way I would frame it. I think you might be referencing the commissioning of ORA specifically as opposed to our wider our approach. And there are other areas that have more of a blend of services and not only Women's Aid either. So we're not the only area that commissions alternative support as well. In relation to the issue around how we measure impact, we do that both, and that's partly why we're refreshing our strategy and our I suppose our performance framework as a partnership, to ensure that we are setting out our priorities and measuring our impact against those. But we also do for particular strands of work. So there is a particular reporting framework for the Commission Service, where they will report not just where we expect not just the sort of figures you're seeing today, but more of an understanding about the impact that's being made for individuals, and that happens through our monitoring meetings, but also particular strands of work that you see reported there in the report around Safe and Together, around MVP, etc., will have their own evaluation frameworks, and will continue, that will also be a way that we measure impact. In relation to benchmarking, we are part of the improvement service nationally, provides, I suppose, a network of violence against women, coordinates the network of violence against women strategic partnerships. So there's opportunity for both myself as chair and for the coordinator, the multi-agency coordinator who sits within our service, to participate in that. We get feedback from the improvement service around our annual reports, etc., around the Equally Safe strategy, and that does allow for an element of benchmarking. Like all of these situations, sometimes we're not comparing exactly like with like, but it does allow us to look at best practice elsewhere, and it does allow us to focus on areas where we think that we either have greatest need or room for improvement.
Just if I could come back in there on the risk impact, where it says a number of short-term risks, other than the communication that we're concerned about, are there other areas that we've got concerns?
Alison, can you touch on that?
Yeah, and apologies, that's maybe me not being as precise with language as I could have been in, because I think some of those risks which were around when we moved into this process have moderated since then, in relation to how the sustainability, obviously, of local women's aid services in terms of how partners are engaging with each other. And obviously also the other one that was referred to there was in relation to the whether negative publicity would make a difference in terms of people seeking support. I think we've actually, although there has been some concerns expressed within the community and obviously from some partners in relation to this, I think what has been the test is that we are seeing Aura begin to establish themselves as a credible service who are getting direct referrals through their chat function and through their own publicity materials, as well as from us directly in terms of referrals for services. And they are engaging with other community supports that can support offer wider support to the people that they are working with.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barclay.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Alison, again for a really, really important report coming forward to us. A couple of comments. I really welcome the evidence that you're starting to find about the engagement with Aurora, because that was a concern, was that there wouldn't be the community buy-in, that there would be a fear of that. Also, I really welcome that Women's Aid receiving the additional funding, because I think that's really, really important with the experience that the Women's Aid organisations have got. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is, kind of follows on to what Councillor Larson has said. Is it to do with in the pandemic, as we're starting hopefully to come out of the pandemic? Is there is there an increase in maybe referrals starting to come through as people who have been sort of stuck together through the pandemic and haven't been able to access services through fear or through having to shield or having to come out? Do you see that that's starting to increase, or have we not seen anything, or do you think that the points, the kind of trigger points within the system are picking these things up? So that's my first question. And the second one is obviously 2.16 is about the engagement with all of the stakeholders with it, and it's just to make sure there is a commitment from yourself and the officers that there will be a proper engagement and continue to have engagement with Women's Aid, so that everybody is around the table. So that's the two things. And again, Alison, thank you so much for this report.
Thank you, Councillor Barclay. Thanks, convener. So just on the, I suppose the hidden harm and demand, I think it's difficult, as I said previously to Councillor Johnson, to give an exact picture. but certainly the intelligence we have from frontline services is that there were periods during I suppose there was two impacts in terms of the pandemic period. One was a reduction for a period in accessibility of support for some victims and women, and also an increase in pressure on families and potentially in some instances, and I say that not in a way that excuses this, but as a result of that pressure, an environment where there has been more abuse and maybe slower recourse to legal measures to address that. So definitely, I think if the intelligence we're getting from partners on the ground is an increase in demand. We, I think, haven't yet necessarily got the full trend information to give an absolutely clear picture of how that looks, but certainly a concern about people's experience, and therefore something that we do need to focus our attention on. In relation to the issue about joint work with partners, absolutely, I obviously address some of that in my response to Councillor Larson, but as well as the monitoring arrangements we have specifically with ORA, we obviously are engaging through a range of operational arrangements with a whole range of partners in this forum: Assist, Rape Crisis, Women's Aid, and others, as well as other statutory partners. And we do that through the operational arrangements around the MARAC, the domestic abuse, distress, etc. But we also have had specific meetings with Women's Aid and did agree in principle to keep those meetings going through this year as well, to allow us to address any particular concerns that they had as well, and to continue to ensure that we get the most in terms of our joint work together in this forum.
Thanks very much, Alison. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks for that, Claire. I see no further questions or comments at this time. Are we happy to agree the recommendations? Thank you very much. Colleagues, takes us on to agenda item number 7, which is the annual report for the community payback orders. Again, the report is here, and Alison will touch very briefly on this, and Jane Gilmartin is on hand to support with that. So, Alison, over to you.
Thanks, convener. Members will be a bit tired of hearing my voice today, so I will be brief. But this is an important report. It provides members with information on the delivery of our community payback service over 2020 to 21. It is a year where the service was quite badly disrupted. It was probably only one of our services that had to shut down during the pandemic period on CMO advice, so Chief Medical Officer advice, for 2 periods. So you'll see in terms of the hours of service delivered over that year, it was substantially less, at around 27,000 than maybe about the 100,000 or so that has been delivered in the past. But you'll also see, and I'm going to ask Jane just to give members a little bit of insight into that the service flexed considerably in that time, where staff couldn't be deployed to deliver community payback. They supported other service activities, and they certainly have adapted in terms of what they've offered to ensure that the service provides maximum value to our communities still. And Jane will speak a little bit about that and to how we plan to address the challenges going forward. So for those that don't know, Jane's our Manager of Justice Services. Jane, can I hand over to you?
Yes, thank you, Alison. I suppose I intend just to summarise the progress made during this reporting period, and I appreciate that obviously committee members have a copy of the full report. During this reporting period, our priority was to ensure that the service delivery continued throughout the pandemic. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback here, so I don't know whether it's you're picking me up properly here.
I think it's because you're on twice, Jane. You're on the meeting twice. So maybe if you shut your camera down on one of your screens, I suppose. That would be great.
I'll try and do that. Apologies.
Convener, I'll just close the connection that Jane's not using. That will solve it.
That's helpful. Thank you. Okay, that's great. Can you hear me okay? Yep. So I'm happy to report, obviously, that services did indeed continue throughout the pandemic, even although there were 2 periods, as Alison noted, of complete lockdown for the unpaid work service during that time. Like most organisations, we had to revisit, adapt and be more flexible in the way that we delivered our services so that our local community and service users still continued to benefit from the work undertaken from criminal justice social work. Ongoing reporting to Scottish Government highlighted during that time, or during the period of the pandemic, that North Lanarkshire Council's position was that we were consistently reducing the backlog of work. Obviously, it was a much lower rate than the previous year, but we were still managing to reduce that quite significantly, given the pandemic. We continued throughout that time to use our indoor practical workshops when allowed, other than the 2 periods when we were in lockdown. So examples of that is our bicycle workshop, where we provide bikes and undertake bike maintenance for our local communities. And I suppose an example of how we utilised that positively was our ability to provide bikes to staff from NHS to support them to commute to and from work. This was very welcome given the pressures around the transport system during the pandemic. Additionally, the provision of the recycled bicycles, which continue to be recovered from our recycling centres and refurbished to a gold standard, were also distributed to our local communities so that our children and adults could be supported with their health and well-being during the pandemic as well. Our indoor woodwork workshop also continued throughout this period, providing significant amounts of materials to support our schools, sheltered housing complexes, children's houses, etc. So some of the examples of this include the provision of outdoor learning activities for our children in the schools, such as mud kitchens, creation of pirate ships, amphitheatres. You might have seen them as you visited some of the schools, and it's been well received, as is our support to sheltered housing complexes through the provision of planters outdoor seating for residents and their family members, which was particularly important during the pandemic. Of equal importance, I think, to note is our ability to provide a service via laundry workshop. And that has been very important to ensure that our vulnerable families were not at disadvantage as a result of poverty. The outdoor work also continued throughout the pandemic, so we did continue with the grass cutting at a much reduced rate, given the 2 metre distance and all the travel arrangements to try and get people back and forward to the various sites across North Lanarkshire. But grass cutting, the garden maintenance across North Lanarkshire continued. We continued to clear the snow, gritted all the areas so that the workers and the local communities could travel safely. And another important part of our service delivery related to the collection and distribution of food parcels and toys to vulnerable families across North Lanarkshire Council, particularly during a period when families were struggling financially whilst trying to cope with the issues around the pandemic. And this is maybe a way of reflecting how we utilise some of our unpaid work service when they were in the closed down position. As already noted, a number of new ways of delivering the service throughout the pandemic needed to be considered. So examples of this included service users undertaking work at home so that we could continue to undertake their unpaid work hours and still provide support to our local community. Other areas to highlight was the opportunity we were afforded to offer a more flexible approach to delivering unpaid work was utilising the additional monies we received from Scottish Government. For example, the interventions provided for a number of third sector organisations to support service users' positive pathway out of offending, as well as the ability to develop and strengthen our support and approaches to tackling domestic abuse issues, as we've already talked about in North Lanarkshire, particularly during the trying period of the pandemic. And just as we've trained all of our social work staff across justice services in a new and more flexible approach to managing domestic abuse, and that's our Up to You programme. So we also provide support to partners and victims of domestic abuse, and we also we have developed the skills and knowledge and training to professionals who work with those who perpetrate domestic abuse, so that those who are convicted, so it's people that have been convicted, we work with across that spectrum of domestic abuse, and then hopefully we can help to change their behaviours so that people can feel safe and secure in their relationships. I suppose the other areas clearly highlighted within the full report about the ways in which we supported our local communities, partner agencies and service users throughout the pandemic. And these are reflected within the questionnaires and the feedback we've received from service users and our local communities. We do hold open days at Justice. I suppose finally just to note, we do hold open days at Justice. And we did have a virtual, we usually hold this every year and it's held within our buildings, but we did hold a virtual platform open day, it went really well. So it's just what we try and do is make sure that people are clear and can actually see the positive work that's done, and they get the opportunity to meet the service users and witness the kind of work that we do. I do have a link. I'm going to try and our last open day, which was November last year. So I'm going to try and send you on this link because it gives you the full information about the open day, and you've got service users speaking on it, people from local communities, etc. And it gives you all of our details about how you can contact us or seek support. So I think that's all I need to cover at this point. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Jane. Much appreciated. We have a number of speakers, a number of questions for you. First is from Councillor McGowan. Agnes.
Thanks, Convener. And thanks very much, Jane, for the report. That's really exciting stuff, I think. I think you do an absolutely amazing job. And I think it's great that doing genuinely useful work that's helping the community and helping the people of North Lanarkshire. I particularly like the bike scheme that you supplied 77 staff members with bikes to get to their work, and I mean that's doing amazing good for the community, health and well-being, climate change, recycling. You're helping us to meet our targets in one fell swoop. So I think that is amazing. Now, a question, will you be part of the active travel hubs there, the big new idea for active travel? And, understand, sorry, my phone's ringing, understand in these that bikes, will be getting repaired. And so do you envisage being part of the active travel hub? And can I ask a wee question about the tables and planters? I support the dementia gardens in Motherwell, in Finlay Street in Motherwell. Is it possible, do you sell the planters and the wooden items that are being made? Or can the dementia gardens, apply for these? We'll all pay for them too. So that's the two questions. I was going to ask about the remote open day because I thought that sounded interesting, but you're saying there's a video all about it, so I'll be able to look at it. So just, will they be part of the active travel hubs, and how do you obtain the wooden items, the planters and chairs and things like that?
Thanks, Councillor McGowan. Yeah, listen, we don't have any issues about being part of the active travel hubs. I mean, we do have the bike workshop, and it's for our local communities. We're also looking at developing, I probably should have mentioned this, we are also looking at developing that within our bike workshop. It's stationed in Hunter Street in Bells Hill, so it is within a building. But our intention with the developments are we're going to buy 2 what we call mobile bike work vans. So basically we can go out to the local communities. So this coming year, we're looking to buy 2 of those and taking that out to our local communities where people within the community can bring the bikes, get them maintained, get them fixed, or we can go out to the local communities and hand that out. So anybody, you know, anybody's can get a bike wherever they are in North Lanarkshire Council. So I think it's a healthy way to move forward. In terms of the planters that you're talking about, basically we make all of those. We don't sell them. What we do is we only ask whoever it is that's making the referral. So say, for example, that schools or people in the local community, what they do is they buy the materials and then we do all the rest of the work and deliver it. But we do have, if we do have quite a lot of stock in terms of wood, so we are able to utilise that without asking people to pay for it. But once that runs out, what we would do is we would just ask whoever it is that's wanting us to make that kind of things, then we're happy to do all the work, and it's basically materials you buy. I hope that's answered your question.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Brandon McVeigh.
Thank you very much, Convener. Jane, thanks very much for your report and your presentation. And also thanks to all in your service who have been supporting the continuity of placements throughout these unprecedented times of the pandemic. I know firsthand from my own community in Kilsyth the way in which the unpaid work has actually positively contributed to community life here and continues to do so. And I think while having spoken to the service, you know, some of the, you know, the indoor practical engagements that service users and staff were doing during the times of lockdown, they found it at times therapeutic and other times really challenging because of the work that we're doing. So all credit to them for continuing to do that. I think I appreciate the honesty of the report, recognising that there has been some delay in projects, and I'm just wondering, when do you think, this is your turn for your crystal ball, Jane, when do you think you might catch up with some of those projects? Because I know that there's our communities who have invested in real big projects with you and are just really keen to see the results hit the playgrounds and bits of our community coming soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor McVeigh. Yep, I'm as keen as everybody else to try and get this back up and running full time. Unfortunately, we are hoping that we can move it forward a bit quicker if we go down to the 1 metre distancing. And we have looked obviously at the home working so that we are able to produce work still coming through the door. I don't know the straight answer to that, when we're going to be fully up and running, because we're still under some restrictions at the moment, given part of the unpaid work is that we actually pick our service users up in vans and take them to the particular area unless they can travel into the centralised base. So it has been really challenging for us as a service, but it is starting to get a bit better. But I don't know the honest answer to say to you. I can't put a deadline on when that will be up and running full time.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Councillor Johnson. Tom Johnson.
Thanks, Convener. It was just to get a general picture from you. Your report says that they could carry out the payback orders within the individual's home environment. So my first question there would be, I take it they could be working among the neighbours and folk that they know. And the other question is, you actually mentioned they could work at home. What kind of work would they be doing in their own homes?
Okay, so they can, if we deliver like the wood as an example, some of the planters, some of the benches or whatever, they actually can, and we give them the tools to do that, then they can do those kind of things. And you'll see in the report that we were talking about, they were making the rags to rugs, which we gave out to, as you well know, RSPCA. So they were doing all that kind of thing at home, and they were making things like the bird and bat boxes and plaques. So there's a whole load of stuff that they were actually doing at home, and with the provision that we were delivering the equipment and the tools and checking up with them that they actually were completing that, and then we were going and picking that back up. So we were double checking all of that was completed. So that helped us get through some of the unpaid work hours as well, rather than people sitting at home not being able to do that, given the lockdown position that we were in. So there was quite a lot of work we could do at home. That's where we would be trying to be really flexible.
Thanks very much for that answer, Jane. Councillor Mooney, Nora?
Hi there, thanks very much, convener. It's just a quick question. I noticed that the bikes are picked up from the recycling centres, but I feel that it's not really well publicised to the public that they can hand in their cycles to those centres and it be used for that purpose. Perhaps a little bit of promotion within the local communities, perhaps in the NLC website and on our Facebook page might be good, because I think you would be inundated with bikes through that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nora. I'm sure, I think Colin is on the call from Corporate Comms. I'll take note of that. So thanks for that. I see Jane nodding as well. And Colin's just come in the chat. Okay. Any other comments? Not happy to agree the recommendations? Okay, thank you very much. Thanks to Alison and Jane for that report. Takes us on to agenda item number 8, which is our update on 1140 funded hours, our expansion of early learning and childcare. And as usual, Gerard is here to take us through the report. Gerard?
Thank you, convener. I plan to just go through 4 main points from the report. It's a significant report. Apologies again with all the appendices that are attached as well. So the 4 areas that I'm going to take you through are infrastructure, workforce, quality, and communications. With regards to the infrastructure, I'll probably just highlight the arrow at the start of the report that shows now that we've got 8 family learning centres completed, the 7 early learning and childcare centre adaptations completed, but also you'll see in one of the appendices, Appendix 1 I think it is, the 79 settings benefiting from the minor works. The table then shows the completion of Cumbernauld Village and Forgewood Family Learning Centre. Forgewood Family Learning Centre officially opened today, and Cumbernauld Village opens tomorrow. And certainly as far as Cumbernauld Community Council are concerned, there has also been a visit and they are absolutely pleased, like everybody I'm sure, about these new facilities in their communities because they are quite remarkable. I'd also like to update regarding the completion dates for the Heathery Park. The start date on site will now be towards the end of March and the handover will be round about, we believe, the middle of August. Again, I think it's again a great testimony to everybody involved in the council for the work that's been carried out with regards to the buildings and all of the adaptations, considering everything that's happened with COVID, etc. The second section I want to draw your attention to is the workforce part of the report. You'll see in section 2.2.3 there has been 536 additional early learning and childcare staff employed as a result of the 1140 programme. I would like committee to note that is not the global figure. There was questions asked of James earlier on, and we still have to include all the catering and facility support staff as well. So you can see, however, a significant increase in staff required and job opportunities for people within North Lanarkshire. I'd also want to highlight as well section 2.2.5 of the report that talks about the permanency of 150 NLC 4 staff and 150 NLC 7 staff. These are not posts that are going to be advertised. There is a number of staff who are on temporary contracts. But again, I think this is a really good news story for the staff, and certainly the trade unions have welcomed this. The third section I'd like to highlight is quality. The quality team have been working specifically with our family learning centres, nursery classes and our partner providers. Appendix 3 of the report outlines that approach, that now that the capital and the workforce is beginning to be completed for the 1140 programme, there is now a specific concentrated focus on quality. And also draw to your attention 2.6.12 of the report under improving outcomes. There's a longitudinal study on the impact of 1140, and this is a work that's been completed by the West Partnership, and further update will be brought to committee in due course. And the final section is maybe just to finish again on a good news story for 1140, and it just gives an essence of what is happening. It's just one example of many, but committee are advised of the success of the Cool Drum Family Learning Centre in receiving the Community Learning and Development Award for the intergenerational work, the Forget Me project, that's a gardening project. And again, I think it just shows the type of, yes, you've got a building, but it's what you can actually do with that resource to support the children, young people, parents and carers, but most importantly, other groups and the community within those areas where those centres are. Convener, I know it's a very long report, but happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Gerard. We have a few questions. First is from Councillor Cathy Johnson.
Thank you, sorry. Just a couple of simple questions here.
You've gone on to mute, Councillor Johnson.
Okay, sorry about that. In 2.6.10, it says here that the partner providers, I mean, all mixed up there, will be a representative and assistant. No, assistant. Excuse me, if I get a drink of water. Will take part in the reviewing of the deferral applications. So they haven't taken place up until now, but they will do from next year. Am I reading that correctly?
So you'll also see within that deferred entry, there was discussions that have taken place with colleagues from the Give Me Time campaign, and we've taken on board a number of the recommendations, and I think it's Appendix 5 of the report that talks about a flowchart now that is very clear about what happens as far as deferred entry is concerned, specifically around the partners. Yes, there is one of the partners that is involved in that, so the answer is yes to that. But I think it's to show it's not just being about the partners, but also about the Give Them Time campaign.
Yeah.
Provided that information, and that's part of our communications about the partner providers are represented at the deferred entry and the transition working groups.
Yeah, you mentioned a flow chart there. Tell me what that's depicting.
Well, it was if you remember, there's been a significant focus on deferred entry, and you'll know that we wanted to be part of the pilot. We applied the first time, we weren't successful. We applied the second time, and we weren't successful. So what we had to do was to set up a process, and we took advice. You'll be aware that there were a number of criticisms about our process for deferred entry. It wasn't clear, it wasn't concise. So what the Appendix 5 highlights is really just the process that happens, so that a parent carer is aware of how they go about that deferred entry process, so that there's equity instead of it just one piece of information being shared with one person through a centre. So it's a very step-by-step guide based on the age and stage of the child, and then the flowchart takes them through step by step. And that was developed in consultation with a number of people.
Okay, thanks very much. That's very interesting. Now, the next one is really just a very simple one. 2.7.
Cathy, can I ask you if you've got more than one other question? If you can ask all your questions, just in Gerard will answer.
Right, well, okay, there's only this one and a little, they're too small with almost yes or no's, right? 2.7.1, Forgewood Learning Centre was allocated to an extra 2 million. Who was it that gave that money? It's clarification I want, that's all.
So this was money that would be within the grant for 1140. And obviously at the time when the original build was looked at, there was a cost aside for it. And then obviously when we did come to actually building it, this was the cost that was incurred in the build of it.
Yes, I think, was that not due to the rise in prices of timber and so on, construction materials?
You might.
So did that come from the Scottish Government, or was that an NLC money? That's what I want to know.
Thomas, can you give out the exact answer to that?
Yeah, it was government funding. It was.
That's fine. That's it. That's all I want to know. Thanks. Thanks, Thomas. That's all I want. And the last bit is, maybe Thomas would be helpful here too. I see at 274, there's an underspend in the budget of 37.9 something million, right?
Sorry, Cathy, is your question around the underspend, around the early years?
Sorry, I didn't know whether Thomas was looking at something else there. It's about the underspend. So was any of that underspend shared with any of your partners, your partner providers?
Okay, so
kept within the council, basically, is what I want to know. Okay.
Okay, so my papers are on my left-hand side, so I'm up with two screens, so it's like on the left occasionally. So I'm on that paragraph. So in terms of that underspend, that would stay within the service. And what has happened with the underspends up to this point, they have been added to the early years reserve, and the treatment of early years underspends via that route, that's in accordance with Scottish Government guidance that we received in terms of how we have to treat early years budgets and grants and reserves, and that guidance was issued at the start of the programme. It has been refined over the last 4 or 5 years as the programme moved forward, but essentially that's the options for the reserve. As I say, we could possibly add it to the reserve at financial year end, or we could retain it within the council as a general fund underspend.
Okay, and see, when you're talking about reserves, do you have a maximum reserve for early years?
No, we don't. In terms of the scheme, the government has been aware that in terms of how they've funded early years up to this point, that there's 2 reasons why we're in an underspend position. The first of those reasons is that in terms of the original estimate of the number of early years pupils who would be attending facilities, the government overestimated the number of pupils at the start of the programme, and we're going back 5 or 6 years when that original estimate was done. So the government is aware that, in effect, they're overfunding authorities at the moment.
Right.
Another reason why we have had underspends in previous years is because of the phasing of the grant that we received from the government, and that grant has been received in advance of need. And that has been done to suit the government's cash flow requirements rather than councils. So the government has been aware of that, and hence the reason that they've said that you can create an early years reserve, and they've been clear in terms of how you can use that reserve. So, for example, it's been noted in the programme that the government probably didn't give authorities enough capital funding. So one of the things that they've said is, if you do have an overspend on your capital projects, you can use that reserve, for example, to top up your capital. So there's various other things that you can use a reserve on, but essentially they should be tied to early years activity.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor London.
Thanks so much, Convener. I know that you instructed Councillor Johnson to ask a series of questions, if she may. I have quite a number of questions for officers, and just wondered, to be guided by you, Chair, if you want me just to provide all of them, or if you want me to split them in 2 sections, because as I say, there are more than 5.
I would appreciate if you could take them as a winner. Thanks very much.
No problem, Convener. Thanks for your guidance. Thank you, officers, for the report. I just want to begin, Convener, before I come to my questions, which focus primarily, as you'd expect, on our partner providers and the work that they do in partnership with the local authority. I just want to say, firstly, to officers, thank you for the report, and thank you for the ongoing work that happens in terms of the implementation of 1140. It is a massive government priority, but also I know locally a massive priority for officers who are rightly proud of the work that we've done to bring it on stream and to deliver it here in North Lanarkshire. And already people right across North Lanarkshire are benefiting from the implementation of that policy. Given I think it's important to reflect on the very positive work that is ongoing. In framing that, Convener, I just want to ask the following questions. What work has been done to engage with the PVI sector, particularly as they prepare for bidding to the framework, so not in the framework, but in preparation for that? Specifically, have the authority considered engaging with the PVI sector on what they would deem to be a sustainable rate of support that takes account of current and future year costs, not historic costs? In relation to CO2 monitors, what level of support has been provided to the PVI sector to ensure their presence in the facilities? And in addition, in relation to the additional announcement of £5 million from Scottish Government, what level of support will be afforded to them in North Lanarkshire from that share? In terms of the PVI sector working group, how can it be strengthened to ensure that it isn't just led by officers? And I'm not saying that is the case, Convener, I'm just saying that the perception maybe. But how can it be the case that partners can bring issues with confidence to the table for debate, including thorny issues that may arise? In relation to the Revenue Monitoring Report, Councillor Johnson touched on this. I don't want to linger on it. I think Thomas has gave a comprehensive answer. I just want to clarify the guidance that's been provided in terms of the underspend projected from 2019-20 and 2021 is that the options available are a general revenue fund underspend or a reserve. That's the two options available in terms of ELC, and that can't be used as one-off resource directed towards partners, for example, to support them during difficult times. And finally, other than funding from the Scottish Government, which I know to the PVI sector during the pandemic did equate to almost £1.5 million of support, what support has the local authority given the sector during that same period? Thanks for your indulgence, Convener, and again, I reiterate thank you to the officers for the good work being done on this programme.
No, thanks very much, Jordan. I'll bring Gerard and Thomas in to answer the questions you've posed there. I mean, I think it is important to say that there are regular meetings that Gerard, the early years team, hold with the PVI sector. We do pay the highest rate in the West Partnership area. I think there is also an understanding that the early years grant from government is said to be cut next year, and we need to be prepared for that and the impact that that could have on early years provision. And I think there is certainly a challenge around that moving forward. So I'll bring in Gerard, and then Thomas can pick up any other points that Gerard may wish to pass to him. Gerard.
Thanks, Convener. I'll try and, I think there was maybe 5 or 6 there. I'll take maybe the 5 and pass the 6 regarding underspend back to Thomas again. The first question was in relation to what work have we done with our partner providers in preparation for the new framework. Committee will remember that this was a criticism of us as a council and I suppose as a service about the lack of joined up work and communication with the partner providers. I can provide you with a list of all the dates that we met with our partner providers. We met on a very regular basis. There was also a subgroup that was set up, and that was to gather the views and opinions of our partner providers, and that would feed into the 4 weekly, which is now moved to every 6 weeks now, meeting. I have to say the meetings have been cordial, and there's now, I think, a far better relationship between our partner providers and the council. So I just want to set that sort of context. As far as the preparation for the new framework, we have informed them that at the last meeting that we were now entering the 3rd point of the current flexible framework, which was obviously it's been reported in the report that you have in front of you. We also did say about the fact that about the Ipsos Murray survey, I think it'd be fair to say to them, I think it's called the National Childcare Cost Survey is the title of it. And I think it'd be fair to say that the comments that were being made about the Ipsos Murray, the original one that came up with the rate of the 531, and particularly the new one, they're concerned that the questions don't reflect their concerns, is maybe the main point. So we have, to answer the specific questions, said that we will keep them up to date with regards to the progress around the framework. However, we, like other councils across the country, will be waiting to see the results from that particular survey that has gone out. I think the second question was around about engagement with partner providers around a sustainable rate. I think I'd probably offer the same sort of answer. We know the fact is that they have, certainly at the last meeting, this was the main point of discussion, was around the fact that they did not feel that the current rate was for them a sustainable rate. We noted their concerns, and again I'd revert back to, we wait to hear the results from the National Childcare Cost Survey. What I would say is that we have said to them as well that we will be looking for a more standardised rate across the local authorities. As the convener has mentioned, we, in the West Partnership, pay the highest rate for the 3 to 5 year olds, and obviously it would help within the West Partnership, so there was that, I suppose, continuity across each of those local authorities. But again, we have advised that that is probably our intention, based on we'll obviously have to wait to see the outcome of the survey. Regarding the CO2 monitoring, what has happened is that we were asked, as you'll be aware, for Scottish Government, this would be back in term 1 and term 2. So this would be from the August time to take readings, and these were to be once a term in every classroom and setting within across the council and within our partner providers. So what we did was, we did have a meeting about our proposals. We did ask if they would like us to deal with that, us being the council, to provide the support. And what we did was, we put a monitor into every setting, and we took the readings of those. We brought them back, we reported that into Scottish Government, and that has happened twice. The original allocation that took place was £10 million, but that was for all local authorities. That broke down to roughly round about 650,000, I think it was, for North Lanarkshire Council. And within that amount of money, it was 16,000 was the capital funding that we actually had for our partners and our childminders. So with that 16,000, that paid for the units, that paid for, I suppose, contractor to go in to take the readings, for officers' time to do the analysis of that work, for that to be inputted into the information that Scottish Government required, and then obviously to be reported. You mentioned then the £5 million additional funding. Just to be clear, we have not received that money in yet. The way that Scottish Government envisage that working is that when we move into this new model, which is that we have to have a weekly recording of every classroom and setting space, we will be giving a monitor to every setting. We will then be monitoring and asking and going through a process to gather that information. It is only then, as my understanding is, that from the grant funding, that if there is an issue, we can draw down and look for that additional resource. But just to be clear, that's £5 million that's been set aside for all local authorities. For North Lanarkshire, our share, I think, would roughly be around about the 300,000 mark. The other point I think you made was about the working group and how we can ensure sort of joined up working. I think as my opening statement, I think we've got those regular meetings in place. We have got subgroups, we have got working groups. The working groups, as I mentioned to Councillor Johnson, was in relation to deferred entry and transitions. We now have a process, a structure in place to ensure there is an opportunity for partner providers to bring along their concerns and for us to discuss them. They're discussed in a smaller group first of all, and then they're brought to a wider group. But again, our partners are asked for agenda items through the small working group, and then that's brought down to the wider. About the other sort of ways that we have supported our partners, I think we've done a significant amount within the report under quality. You'll see Appendix 5. There has been joined up working with our early years managers who have supported, and I have to say that work has been welcomed by the partners. So they have been providing training programme. They've also been, the partners have been provided with access to GLOW, and that has been a long-standing bone of contention with our partner providers who have not had access, and we've now resolved that so that they can have access to the national digital offering. There's a whole list of things I could probably say, Councillor London, about the sort of joined up working, but that would just give you a bit of a flavour of the journey that we've been on, where those initial days where there were councillors who were concerned because of what they were hearing, and we did bring about change. But I would say that the significant focus, certainly in the last meeting, was about the framework. And as I say, we would have to wait for the outcome of that survey. I'll maybe pass to Thomas just about the specific question around underspend, and hopefully I've covered all your questions.
Thomas?
Okay, thanks, convener. So I'll make some general points around early years funding. Obviously, the budget for early years consists of two elements. It consists of the historic 600 hours element, which was funded by the council, and that has been topped up by, if you like, the 1140 funding received from the government. So the global budget, in effect, is made up of two elements. In terms of what happens at year end, as I say, that we have got the ability to earmark underspend within early years and put that funding into reserve. Alternatively, that money could be part of the general fund reserve. And in terms of those decisions, in terms of earmarking, those are taken at year end through the work of the Section 95 officer, considering the demands of the service and the kind of wider council. So it's we have to be conscious that we don't look at particular bits of any service in isolation. Any strategic financial decisions are made looking at the council as a whole, but also looking at the micro issues that we have within services. So it's to bear that in mind, that we don't look at things in isolation. In terms of the use of reserves, it's important to remember a reserve isn't recurring funding, and it only can be used once. So in terms of how you use a reserve, it's suited to some elements of spend more than others. So for example, I mentioned earlier on, potentially we'll have a cost overrun in terms of the capital programme linked to early years, and that is a good use of a reserve, because in effect that allocation would happen once. It would take care of a particular funding problem we have at a point in time, and that would be that. In terms of the decisions on how to use the reserve, they'll be taken through the 1140 board, bearing in mind advice from the finance service, and also taking account aims, strategies, etc. from the service. So that's how the money will be allocated in the future. In terms of how we've reported the reserve to date, we've been very, very transparent in how we've reported the 1140 funding, and the reserve is actually part of an appendix which is in the budget monitoring report that we'll come to later on. And at the end of last financial year, the early years reserve was circa £11.2 million.
It's also important to bear in mind the point the convener made earlier on, that there has been a confirmed reduction in 1140 funding for next year. That reduction is £1.64 million. In terms of funding after 22-23, the government is currently consulting with authorities around the long-term asks for early years funding, and we're in that process with the government. The government has asked us to fill in templates and pro formas, and we're currently doing that. So in terms of one of the uses of the reserve, it's key that we actually retain funding to make sure that if this cut the 1140 programme as a permanent cut, that certainly we have that funding in place for the short to medium term. And again, that's another kind of key ask on that reserve. So hopefully that gives you a bit of context in terms of the use of the reserve, the types of things we use it for. We have got confirmation from the government in terms of the original grant letter that you actually can create a reserve, but it's to bear in mind that any use of funds of this magnitude have to be seen in the wider context of the Council's financial planning, and certainly the use of reserve is part of our medium-term financial plan.
Thanks very much, Thomas. Gerard, Jordan, brief supplementary from yourself.
Thanks so much, convener, and thanks very much for indulging so many questions on this important report. Just the brief supplementary then. First of all, Gerard, I think perhaps may have forgot the last question, which is understandable given they came in quick fire, which was just the clarification around Scottish Government have given £1.5 million during the pandemic to PVI sector. Beyond the £0.5 million for quality improvement from the council, what additional resource from the local authority has been provided to support that sector during the difficult time? Not Scottish Government resource. And then just the follow-up question, thanks convener again. Gerard, you mentioned the overall potential allocation in terms of the CO2 figure, in terms of the 5 million being around about 300,000. My question specifically was, do we know what portion of that will go to PVI, or an early indicative figure rather, it will go to the PVI sector in terms of that overall allocation? Thank you, convener.
Okay, Gerard.
I'll try and go through then. So the specific question is around what additional support was given to our partner providers. From a council perspective, remember, I think it's worth pointing out again that our funded providers were provided with full funding throughout the lockdown. And I think it's really important to remember that that wasn't the case for all local authorities. I myself attended the meetings with the partner providers to give the COVID updates because of the information we had from a council perspective, and we provided advice and guidance. I would also say that the officers' time was significant in relation to those that sit within the early years team. As you know, central officers, the early years managers provided a lot of support to the partner providers during that time, and also provided the online training. So over and above the 1.5 million you've said, I would say in response to that, there was a significant amount of officers' time from a council perspective to support. And there was a lot of phone calls that came in looking for advice and guidance during that sort of period. So I think that's the response we give you to that particular question. It's specifically around CO2, the portion of 300,000. We're still looking at the grant conditions. It has not been my understanding at the moment that we're going to be given this money and then it's to be distributed equally to our partner providers. My understanding is that once we take the readings, if there is a particular issue in a setting, that is what that money would be used for and can be applied for. Hopefully that answers those two particular questions.
Thanks very much, Gerard. Councillor Kelly.
Serena, I've come in on every committee, as Jared knows, over the last few years about Fortwood Family Learning Centre. I think it's really appropriate that we're out there today with the official opening to recognise what an outstanding facility that is, like all our facilities across North Lanarkshire, the impact it has on our children, you know, in terms of their health and well-being. It was absolutely wonderful to see, and the outstanding partnership work and staff work, not only within the centre but within the community, the impact it has on the community, the fact that the staff are working extensively with CLD and other organisations. It's a wonderful setup. I know that's replicated across North Lanarkshire, and again it highlights the outstanding job that North Lanarkshire Council and this administration has done in delivering 1140 ahead of anywhere else in Scotland, the best in terms of in Scotland. And credit goes to yourself, convener, and all those staff involved. It was a real pleasure to be out there today and see it firsthand. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Kelly. Councillor McGowan.
Yeah, I would also like to praise North Lanarkshire for the nurseries and how they've completed them, and ahead of the rest of Scotland. I think you're way ahead of the game, and it's absolutely amazing. I just want to ask a question. Paul has got his nursery finished in his area. I am eagerly waiting on the Heathery Park, and I hope there'll be a big opening for that, because I can't wait to see it. I'm really looking forward to it. But I just had a slight worry about one of the paragraphs that says that there's a problem with drains in the car park, and flooding was what held up the previous one in Wishaw Hills. So when I saw that, I thought, oh no, not again. And it said, make some comment, if Scottish Water refuse, there'll be some other scheme put in. I presume that's easily put in, and will it incur more cost? I just don't want the Heathery nursery to be held up in any way, because I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks very much, Gerard.
I would agree, the resource, and certainly for that particular area, taking a building and giving it new life for the community would be well received. As I mentioned, a slight change, and nothing to do with the car park issue, but a slight change to the indicative dates. As I said at the beginning, roughly I'm beginning around about the 21st of March is the starting date for on-site work, and the handover around about the 19th, 20th of August. So I can give you the assurance that as far as the building is concerned, that's the indicative dates that have been given, provided to me. Yes, I'm aware of the car park drainage issue. It's obviously been investigated. I will be able to, certainly at the next committee, give a more detailed report. Hopefully by that point it'll be nearly finished, and you'll be able to, like other councillors, to go and visit the setting. But hopefully, as you've seen in other builds where we've had issues to do with drainage, we've found solutions with our partners, Scottish Water. So hopefully that would be the case. And yes, the buildings across North Lanarkshire have been excellent, and you know, the building that Councillor Kelly was mentioning is one of the new builds. But I would also say that the adaptations that we made to other buildings across the council have brought new life to the early years settings within those particular areas.
Thanks very much, Gerard. Councillor Barclay.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of comments. First of all, just to add also my delight to the Codrum Family Learning Centre getting the award, very well deserved. I'm really pleased for them. I then go on to it's trying to see my baby. Jared, it's like, you know, I don't think this will be the last committee that we ever talk about the Cumbernauld Village Family Learning Centre, but it's been a long hard road, and I really want to commend Derek, Jared, Jennifer, and all the team that's really got behind the Family Learning Centre in the village. I'm really pleased that the amount of community engagement to bring the community round, to really, one, looking forward to the centre being there, and also to opening. So again, just really pleased on that. So a couple of questions. One is, it's a bit early yet because they're still in, but is there been kind of any the reaction from staff to this kind of innovative new build and the link with the community, with the allotments and all the outdoor learning, and that is ongoing, and I know there's still a lot of communication to go on, but it's to ask about how do the staff feel about it at the moment. And the other one is something I'm actually really quite concerned about. It's at 2.1.3 and it's about the cladding. Now, in it it's saying that it's been the wrong cladding that's been put onto it. So I've got kind of two main questions on this one. Is it solely the wrong cladding due to colour, or are any other concerns? I'm obviously looking at the safety aspect. And the other part is, in removing this cladding, is it definite as part of the contract that because it has been Morgan Siddle that's made the error on this, that they definitely will be absorbing the cost on this because they haven't adhered to what they were supposed to do? And also the disruption, what have they looked at the disruption that this could cause to the early learning centre and the children and the safety aspect of that, and also kind of the local community who have put up with a lot of disruption because of the build, but have bought into it because it's so good. What questions there for you, Gerard? But again, as I say, thanks very much for the ongoing work on that.
In response, Councillor Bartlett, yes, I'm absolutely delighted with the building, and as far as Councillor Kelly would have heard this today as well, the fact of how enthusiastic the staff are about the setting. The Family Learning Centre, Heads of Centre, today, for example, and it'll be the same tomorrow for the opening, are just full of life about what this new resource has been able to bring not only to the community, to parents and carers, but most importantly to the children. Regarding the allotments, you'll notice that sort of joined up working. Councillor Kelly was hearing the same today about the allotments that are not on site, whereas the ones Cumbernauld Village are on site, whereas the ones that we're seeing at Forgewood Family Learning Centre are further away. But there is that joined up work with the communities, and it's not just about those types of things, it's about supporting families and the joined up working with other agencies. As Councillor Kelly saw today, it was about the food bank, the clothes bank that's on site. So these buildings that have now been produced for North Lanarkshire play a vital role in supporting families, very vulnerable families, but certainly from the allotments point of view, yes, and to have that gate, as you know, at the back that just opens up and goes right through the back. When I was there, the staff felt great pride in it. They were working extra hours to unpack because they wanted their setting to look the best, and I believe they've gone above and beyond for tomorrow as well for the official opening, so I'm looking forward to see that. Regarding the cladding, this is my fault, I have to say. I suppose I'm a wee bit attention to detail about how something looks. And I was concerned about how it was looked. There was a selection process, but I don't know whether or not it would look right. I went up just before Christmas and I was absolutely reassured. I felt as if some of the staff had been talking to architects or something, because they were describing how it blended into the children's house that's there. And no, I can give you reassurance from a health and safety perspective, there are no issues. It's Gerard McLaughlin who was just been looking to a wee bit of attention to detail, because it's a wee bit different. And the reason it's a wee bit different is because of where it sits and about the area, and also about the fact of reflecting that sort of woodland area as well. So I'll give you reassurance that no, the cladding is absolutely fine and it looks absolutely beautiful, and it's been commented on by the staff there. So I'm more than happy the way it finished. It was the way initially I looked at it in a picture, but it's when you actually go to see it. But I think it's an excellent resource for the children, young people, families, but most importantly, the community of Cumbernauld.
Can I just supplementary on that, Chair? It's just again on the cladding. It's about the disruption. How much disruption will there be in order to replace it?
No,
Sorry, Gerard will clarify that for you.
Just to clarify, we're not going to be replacing it. I was just a wee bit worried about how it was going to look. So there's no replacement. Gerard McLaughlin caused a stir. And now everything is now being restored because it looks absolutely fantastic. It's different from some of the others, but it has to be because of, as you know, the unique setting in Cumbernauld, but also that's a woodland area, and obviously taking on board the views of architects and planning as well. But no, I can reassure you, it's not coming off, it's staying, it's absolutely beautiful.
Okay, I just as one last comment, just for your indulgence, Frank.
Come on.
Sorry, very short and sweet. Just to put on record, thanks to the Village Community Council, because of them wanting to have the links with the allotment, and they gave up allotments that were part of the Village Community Council side to the Learning Centre, so as that there would be that smooth transition, and so as that they would work with them. So it's just to get on record, and thanks very much for that, and thanks Gerard, and thanks Frank.
Thanks very much, Claire. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Convener. I'll try and be short on this, given the time that we're dragging on, but it's been very detailed questions and responses from officers. Can I echo previous colleagues' comments and praise for Gerard, Thomas and the service for the excellent work they have done, and particularly the Family Learning Centre in the village. I've stayed there for over 30 years. My kids went to the school there, and just delighted to see that. In relation to the allotment, it was a former neighbour of mine, John, that maintained that land for about 50 years, and it came back to the council. So it's fantastic to see the kids getting back out to nature, and you don't have to be an epidemiologist to know that getting out and about is good for kids' immune system and good for their well-being, that they get out and get together. Could I make a point as well about, as Councillor Barclay made, fantastic to see the Cildrum Family Learning Centre getting the award, well deserved there. And given we've got cognizance and responsibility for the rest of the area, it's good to see Craignuke, one of the more sort of depressed areas where there's development and stuff there. So that's fantastic news. Could I make an observation regarding the CO2 monitors? It should be very well known, especially by officials, that if a building has got in excess of 5,000 parts per million CO2, that building, according to health and safety, has got to be evacuated. And I just want to make a point in connection with wearing masks that our children tend to, and this is peer-reviewed science, not conspiracy, and I've actually tested it myself. Masks increase the CO2 inhalation up to 10,000 parts per million and above. Anyone seeking a peer-reviewed article on that, I'll pass it to them. But fantastic work, and it's just great to see these places opening. So congratulations to the service.
Thanks for your comments there, Paddy. I see no further questions in the chat. I'd be happy to agree the recommendations. Thank you very much, colleagues. Takes us on to agenda item number 9, which is getting it right for every child. This paper is for noting, colleagues. I won't ask Gerard to go through the report. If there are any questions, I'm sure Gerard will be happy to answer them at this time. No, we're happy to agree the recommendations. Okay, thank you very much, colleagues. Takes us on to agenda item number 10, which is the proposed relocation of Bothwell Park High School. There have been extensive engagement sessions regarding this. It's a very comprehensive paper that's in front of you today. Again, I'm not going to ask Gerard to go through this. I trust that members will have read the outcome of this. It will provide an excellent new resource for Bothwell Park School, and we'll open it up to any questions that members may have on this particular agenda item. Okay, colleagues, we'll be happy to agree the recommendations. Thank you very much. Takes us on to agenda item number 11, which is our revenue budget monitoring report. Thomas is on hand to deliver this as usual, and Thomas will pass over to you to highlight any salient points.
Thanks, Convener. This is the service's revenue monitoring report to the period ended 7th of January, which is accounting period 10. And firstly, I'd like to highlight the service continues to operate in the midst of significant COVID activity to a value of £24 million. And this information is summarised in Appendix 6. In summary, the service anticipates a net underspend of £2.3 million through to financial year end across the remainder of its activities. In terms of core underspends, these have occurred in areas such as headquarter staffing, the 1140 programme and vacancy management. The report also advises there are areas of ongoing demand pressure and activities such as ASN transport and utilities costs, along with the rephasing of specific savings which are outlined in Appendix 5, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Thomas. We have a question from Councillor Castle. Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Thomas, it's just some clarification on some of the points here. It's on page, the first one's on page 349, and it's the increased costs in relation to the ASN provision. Do you see in the future that will, I know there was hope there would be a reduction in that. Do you see in the future that there will be a reduction, and what are the specific reasons for that? I know as some of that, I take it's COVID led. The next question is on page 350, and it's it's the agency fees. What are the cross-boundary costs? The next question is on the page 352, and it's the reconfiguration of the school week. Are there further processes to be taken to achieve a saving in that, or have these been fully implemented? And the last one is a review of the secondary school library operating model. What will that? How will that be involved? What are you looking at to be done in the secondary school library model that will achieve that saving? Thanks.
Thanks very much. A couple of questions there, Thomas. You happy to pick them up?
Yeah, I'll pick them up, and perhaps Derek might want to come in as well. So in terms of ASN, if we break this down, if we look at transport first, there are ongoing pressures within the transport market relating to the price of fuel, the cost of recruiting drivers, etc. So in the short term, that will be quite difficult to bring those costs down. In terms of out of authority, again, in terms of bringing pupils back, it's unlikely that in terms of current pupils who are out with authority that they will come back prior to their scheduled period within school ending. And part of that has been caused by COVID. Certainly there's been some lost time in prepping for that, because obviously to bring pupils back, we have to have an offer within NLC for them, and certainly some of that preparation work was it was tougher to do that during COVID because the priority was education recovery within NLC. So certainly long term, the service does anticipate that there will be cost reductions and savings within ASN. That is certainly the ambition, and there is significant work ongoing within the service to make sure that can get achieved in future years. But certainly short term, as presented in the accounts, that has been tougher to achieve in the last few years, primarily linked to COVID and what the service has had to do in terms of other priorities. In terms of the school week, the action in terms of delivering savings within the school week, that has happened. Schools have been advised what will happen in terms of the school week. However, linked to that, we do have additional funding that has come in to the service from the Scottish Government, and one of the decisions that the service will have is how will we allocate that additional funding for teachers in the short term, remembering that some of this funding is likely to be needed for 21 hours in the future. So certainly there's a window for the service to consider how it wants to allocate additional teaching funding for a few years before the introduction of 21 hours. In terms of agency fees, that covers payments such as pupils being placed in other authorities. There's also agency fees in terms of payments to some of our partners such as NHS. It tends not to be a financial burden. The agency fees tend to be known each year. There was a final one. Was it to do with the operating model?
It was the review the secondary school library operating model. Where will that be?
So in terms of that proposal, again, there's work ongoing within the service to determine how that will work, given that the library service that the council operates elsewhere within the council will be coming to education and families from the start of the new financial year. So we have an officer appointed who will work alongside Janie to actually look at that in terms of how we can actually achieve an outcome whereby we actually achieve the financial saving but can still offer a library option within schools. So that work is ongoing, is likely to be reported through education and families committees in the future. So there'll be updates on how that work is going and what can be achieved through bringing together the council's wider library service together with school libraries. So I don't know if there's anything else you want, and perhaps Derek, if you want to maybe add some extra.
Are you content with the answers that you received there, Tom?
Yeah.
Thanks very much for that. Thanks, Thomas. I see no further questions or comments on this paper. I'd be happy to agree the recommendations. Thank you very much. Takes us on to agenda item number 12, which is the review of North Lanarkshire Scheme of Devolved School Management, DSM. Again, this is a paper for noting, but I'll ask Derek just to set a brief context on this and then open up to any questions. Derek.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you to Thomas for the previous item, which kind of sets this item up. This is a placeholder report. We are due to reset our DSM scheme by April, as per Scottish Government and COSLA guidance. We feel that there are a number of things that are still outstanding that would contribute to such a scheme. Bits and pieces of, well, I say bits and pieces, quite important aspects of how certain government commitments that have been made as part of the programme for government within the first 100 days will translate into specific grant allocations. For example, and the paper talks through some of the issues we are trying to resolve. So what we intend to do in summary, and the paper goes through this and I'm happy to take questions on it, we intend to do the work in the background to set the scheme on a provisional basis for April, and in the first available opportunity in the new administration to bring a paper back through committee for member approval to say this is what the scheme will look like. Normally when you review the DSM scheme, it's a sense check on how you are dispersing resources to schools, but obviously there are a number of new commitments from Scottish Government that we want to get right. For example, as Thomas has said, there is a manifesto commitment of Scottish Government which is now in the programme of government to introduce 21 hours of teacher contact. The initial funding streams for that has been an initial 65.5 million, which has come through to local government with certain requirements placed upon us. And that's to give us X number of teachers and X number of pupil support assistants. There is also a COSLA briefing note that went to COSLA leaders around an additional £80 million. That's much more ambiguous as to what we would actually get from that and what kind of associated conditions would come with that funding. We think it's prudent to wait until we see what the funding conditions are before we say exactly how we would implement the scheme. There's a number of moving parts there, but in reality, what members should be reassured about is that Thomas O'Hagan oversees the DSM review group. It has head teachers from primary, secondary, ASN and heads of establishment from early years on it. It also includes business partners from finance and HR. The group is a very mature group. It's overseeing all aspects of the scheme, and we hope to bring the full scheme through committee in the first available opportunity once we get a bit of certainty from Scottish Government around a few bits of the funding, and in the first available opportunity in the new administration, and there won't be any particular surprises, I don't think, for members, because it's all covered off in issues which Thomas has already gone through in the revenue monitoring report. Happy to take questions, convener, and Thomas may also be wishing to answer some of the questions that come forward.
Thanks very much, Derek. We have a question from Councillor Tom Johnson and then Councillor Cathy Johnson. Tom, over to you. Tom, are you there?
Yes. Hello?
Hi, Tom, can hear you.
Can you hear me? My
Can hear you,
screen's
Tom.
gone blank.
Can hear you fine.
Well, my actual question is on the Scottish Attainment Challenge. I seem to be back.
Tom, you're on mute. I can't hear you. Sorry, you went on mute there.
Hello? Can you hear me? Right. The Scottish Attainment Challenge is to drop over the next few years. Could you tell me, is it 11 local authorities that have got it?
I think Councillor Johnson's just dropped off the call. I think his question was about the challenge authorities. There are 9 challenge authorities. The decision around Scottish Attainment Challenge is to spread that across the 32. So that results in section 2.5E highlights the funding reduction from 7.5 million in 2021-22 to 3.4 million in 25-26. Councillor Cathy Johnson. Cathy, you're on mute. Cathy, you're still on mute, I'm afraid.
Right. You want to speak?
Yes, I wanted to ask, what is the Scottish Attainment Challenge money for North Lanarkshire dropping to next year? And is it a case that it was currently 11 authorities that had it, or was it 9 authorities had it? How many authorities will actually have it next year? And what is it dropping to next financial year?
Okay, thanks, Tom. So, when you dropped off there, I said there are 9 challenge authorities. That's been spread across the 32. Thomas has got the year-on-year breakdown for the figures going from 7.5 to sorry. No, I've lost my way. From 7.5 to 3.4, and I'll give you the annual reduction for the next 3-4 financial years. Thomas.
It's circa £1 million a year for the 4 years, and we can send that specific stuff to Councillor Jones. I can get an exact numbers, but the cut is £1 million a year over the 4 years.
And how many extra authorities are getting the money?
The funding is being extended to all 32 authorities.
All 32, right? Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Cathy?
Right. I'd just like to say, first of all, I'm delighted to see the provision of the free provision of music. I don't know how you're going to organise it, Derek, but I really welcome it. I think music has been the underdog for a long time, and music can help so many children in so many ways. And I'm delighted to see it coming back, both the tuition and instruments, which is really, I think it's just absolutely wonderful.
Cathy, you've gone on mute.
Temperamental computers. And the same with the digital. I see that they're continuing with the digital promise that every child should have a device, which is good news. However, the next one might be a more taxing job for for staff. The introduction of 21 hours teacher class contact time. I mean, that's great for the teachers, but how will this manage to be staffed to ensure that children's attainment will be maintained and enhanced? The 20, because that's 4 days. That's like 4 hours a day, isn't it? Or is it?
Yeah, an interesting question there, Cathy. Derek?
I'm delighted to have been asked that question, Councillor Johnson, and thank you very much for spotting it. We're obviously, and I'm conscious I've got trade union colleagues on the call, and I have been speaking to them about this issue. OECD said in their report on Scottish education in June that Scottish teachers teach more than is internationally true of their comparators across the world or their peers across the world. In the programme, in the manifesto, Scottish Government made a commitment to move to 21 hours of teacher contact. That was then followed up with some language in the programme of government, which suggested that they would bring forward 4,900 teachers to deliver initially to what support recovery, but then to the language in the programme of government says to allow teachers to move to 21 hours. And we would intend to bring forward a paper on all the intricacies of that in due course through committee in the first opportunity we have. The issue for Scottish Government, and I'm actually involved in a bit of work on behalf of the West Partnership and ADES to help Scottish Government implement the policy. We currently have quite a lot of additional teachers in the system that we paid for out of COVID contingencies and short-term funding arrangements. We will need those teachers in order to, if you can excuse the expression, switch on the 21 hours of teacher contact. And so the issue really is how quickly can we get the money into the system and the teachers supplied into the system to secure those arrangements. But there will be pressures because, as you rightly say, Councillor Johnson, if there are 21 hours of teacher contact in a 25-hour primary school week, that's 4 hours a week where a child does not have access to their direct teacher. So we need to make sure that there's a proper reworking of the primary curriculum. In rural areas of Scotland, as you're well aware, Councillor Johnson, that will further exacerbate pressures in terms of getting subject specialisms. And when you come on to secondary, I'll just make the point that 21 hours of teacher contact is equivalent to 1,260 minutes. And that is not efficient in terms of our current secondary school models, and we may have to look again, and obviously we would seek the members' support for any plans we bring forward, but we may have to look again at our secondary school week configuration so as to get a more efficient distribution of resources. The biggest problem I think that there might be in the system is when Scottish Government have tried to recruit teachers in specialist subjects recently, they've ended up with shortages in certain key areas, and this policy may just exacerbate some of those challenges. So it's very, very important that we work closely with Scottish Government to make sure the granular planning that will help schools and local authorities to enable the policy to be switched on is done. But I'm pleased so far with the engagements we've had with Scottish Government that I've been involved in, and indeed with the granular work that's been done across the West Partnership to model the future curricular provisions we will need and the staffing that will be required to activate them. So it's a really interesting bit of work. I'm leading on this for the West Partnership along with colleagues in Glasgow, and I'll hopefully be bringing back reports in due course at the first available opportunity through committee. And like I said, I'm talking these issues through with our trade union colleagues on a regular basis. So we actually have the work we're doing in North Lanarkshire is probably ahead of the curve in Scotland, but it's coming out of Thomas's work in the DSM review group with the group of head teachers that I mentioned before, and when I introduced the paper. I'm happy to take further questions.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Derek.
Thanks,
Good luck
Cathy.
with it.
Thanks, Cathy. I don't see any further questions at this point, so I'm happy to agree the recommendations. Yep. Okay, thanks very much, colleagues. Takes us on to agenda item number 13, which is contracts. Under Chief Officer approval, you have that information there, colleagues. Are there any questions to that? We're happy to agree. Happy to agree. Okay, I'm conscious we have taken the other two items, but just before we finish, as has become standard in recent weeks, this is the last committee before we move to the election. So before we close the meeting, I just want to say a few words and really a few thank yous. I think we would all agree the last few years have been incredibly challenging for everyone, but I think our teams, our young people, our staff within our establishments and in our communities have shown great resilience and have been able to advance really innovative practice and provide critical support to so many people. So I want to thank them all. Some of them are on this call, some of them are not. Our central team, as I say, those in our establishments and our communities, a big well done and a thank you, I'm sure, from all of us. I know a number of you may be stepping down from the council, so I would like to thank you for your contributions and scrutiny over the course of the last term and for the collegiate approach that has been taken most of the time. So thanks very much for that. I would like to pay a special tribute to Councillor Quigley, the Vice Convener, who is retiring at the election in May. Claire has been a tremendous support to me and her community in the wider North Lanarkshire, and I'm sure we all wish Claire and all those who are stepping down all the very best for the future. And to those of you who are standing for re-election, I wish you well, and I hope to see you when the new council forms in May. So thanks very much to everyone, and at that we'll bring the meeting to a close. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.